Astonishing Legends Network.
Listen to the Astonishing Junk Drawer exclusively at patreon.com/astonishinglegends.
Pandemonium, riots,
Dogs and cats living together.
I am going to be fired by Forrest probably because we gave Ed the night off.
All this technology can be weaponized. And then we're talking about the ultimate weapon on the earth.
And that was all tied to Bob Bigelow and Bigelow Aerospace. Highlighter and regular pen? I don't think so, Forrest.
Yeah.
I would know about it.
This upends everything. This breaks the world.
And what was allowed to be in the book is what he knows he can safely say.
Did you ask it if it believes in aliens?
Astonishing Legends would like to thank BetterHelp, Hims, Squarespace, First Leaf, our contributors at patreon.com, and you, our listeners, for making tonight's show possible.
Tonight, we sail into the murky waters of one of the most perplexing maritime mysteries of the 20th century. The astonishing legend of an abandoned ship, a missing crew, and a century of unanswered questions. This is the story of the Carroll A. Deering. Early in the morning of January 31st, 1921, surfman C.P. Brady manned his post at the U.S. Coast Guard's Cape Hatteras Station 183, scanning the horizon with a telescope. Brady and his co-workers were charged with protecting mariners from the relentless and imposing hazard of the treacherous Diamond Shoals. And on this day, winter weather was lashing the coast. 20 and 30-foot waves with whitecaps produced a fog of mist that made it hard for Brady to do his job, especially when the outer Diamond Shoal was almost 6 miles away from Station 183. But this morning, something caught his eye. Was that something out there? He only saw it for a moment, but it looked like there it was again, a colossal vessel, stationary, barely visible from shore. He rang the alarm, still unsure if his mind was playing tricks on him. It wasn't. Brady alerted the station's keeper, and the Hatteras surfmen attempted to get out to the trapped vessel in a surfboat, which took them several times to launch due to the relentless waves. When they finally reached the outer Diamond Shoal, they saw a beautiful 250-foot, 5-masted schooner plowed well and truly into the sand. All but one of her sails were up as though she were underway, and the wind and the waves were so bad they couldn't even safely get close enough to make out her name on the transom. But one thing stood out to them. There was not a soul on the deck, and in fact, no signs of life at all. That ship was the 1,879-ton Carroll A. Deering. It took days and multiple approaches to get aboard and assess the situation safely. As is often the case with an astonishing legend, rescuers and salvagers were only left with more questions than answers. For over a century, theories have swirled around this ghost ship. Was it mutiny, piracy, paranormal, or something far more sinister? Tonight, we dive into the evidence, examine the theories, and attempt to unravel the secrets of the Carroll A. Deering. Join us as we navigate one of the most baffling cases in nautical history, the tale of the ship that came home without its crew.
Welcome back to Astonishing Legends. I'm Scott Philbrook, and this is Forrest Burgess.
Like a Flying Dutchman, the 5-masted schooner Carroll A. Deering loomed through the mists about Diamond Shoals today, all sails set, but unmanned. The Washington Herald, February 3rd, 1921.
Join us tonight as we take a look at the 100-year-old mystery of the abandoned ghost ship Carroll A. Deering.
And we're back.
That we are, folks. Arg.
This is not a, you did,
I don't think there's any pirates in this story.
Well, we did mention the possibility of piracy, but...
Yeah, we did.
Okay.
There's always could be pirates. I'll tell you what, though. I love a maritime mystery, so we're excited for tonight's show. A couple of very quick announcements. Firstly, if you're a subscriber to Astonishing Legends, you may have noticed that we're posting a new weekly show in our main feed, the Astonishing Dead Letter Office. This new short format show will be posted weekly, year-round on Tuesdays at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, and available commercial-free and uncensored the Sunday before for our patrons at patreon.com/astonishinglegends.
Yes, and remember, patrons also get commercial-free versions of the main show, as well as the Patreon-exclusive Astonishing Junk Drawer, which is generally recorded live on video and is a much more casual conversation about topical paranormal events and includes special guests.
Yeah, the point is there's more content than ever before available now from Astonishing Legends, both for free and on Patreon.
And in other news, we're doing a site-wide 15% discount on all of our merch from 12:01 a.m. on Black Friday through midnight on Cyber Monday. No code required. So if you're looking to get a good deal on that hoodie, beanie, or an astonishing camping mug, now is the time.
Okay, and for those of you interested in prying into my private life, my wife, Emily Spivey, was just a guest on our dear friend Rachel Dratch's podcast, Woo Woo with Rachel Dratch. That's the name of her show. Rachel is a former Saturday Night Live cast member and the infamous Debbie Downer, among hundreds of other amazing characters. But her show is, as she says, adjacent to Astonishing Legends in that she and her co-host Irene have guests and friends on to talk about woo-woo things, and it's pretty great. It's a lot of fun, too.
Oh, indeed, it is pretty good. Really entertaining, great conversation. Terrific name for a podcast, by the way. I wish we.
Yeah, it's your favorite expression, woo-woo.
Well, we fell into it. I think that
Yeah,
it was aimed at us, and she's just embraced it. Also, you can see Rachel on American Home Shield warranty commercials. So she's the running character there. So American Home Shield, yeah, we're seeing a lot of those on our streaming channels. But she's funny and terrific in those. And by the way, we got a plug on that app, right?
Yep. She and, of course, my wife, Emily, they gave us a good shout out. So.
Oh, terrific. Well, and then you are going on her show too, aren't you?
Yes, I am. I am. We just got to work out a time. So I'll be going on there as well. I feel like if I come marching in the door with file 10, that's going to put her listeners off the feed. They like to have fun. So I don't know what story I'm going to tell you.
Either that or we just lose all credibility. But yeah, don't know where my invitation. I guess lost in the email. But
maybe it's coming. Maybe it's coming.
Very good. Excellent on all that. Well, we got a lot of show on a terrific mystery for you folks. So let's dive in.
Yeah, that's the first organic reason for us to use that metaphor, I think, finally. We've been saying dive in for 10 years, but now we're
I get
really
you. Yeah. Okay. Nice.
Well, one of the first things we like to do at the outset of something like this is cite our sources. And in the old days, it used to be that there was just books. But now there's a lot of shows out that do what we do, podcasts, people that we've had on our show, we've been on their show, people we respect very, very much. And that's the case here, too.
Indeed, we do. And a lot of these folks are, well, much more professional and skilled at this than us. So they're actual scholars and writers and researchers. Yes. None of it cursory, but there's a terrific article, very comprehensive and very readable, a very fun read by a friend of ours, Nathaniel, or Nate, as we know him, Lloyd, and his podcast is called Historical Blindness. And we actually just saw Nate at the podcast movement in Denver.
Oh, yeah, the one we went to in Denver.
That's right. He stopped by and we chatted for a bit, and that was a lot of fun. Yeah, he's very serious about this. Covers a lot of the same subjects that we do, as he says in his about page here. The principal purpose of Historical Blindness and blog is to dredge up interesting and largely forgotten stories from our past, with a specific focus on demonstrating the inscrutability, the ineffability, the unknowability of the past by examining cases of outrageous hoaxes, mass hysteria, baffling mysteries, and unreliable historiography, such as apocryphal accounts that contravene accepted history. Thereby raising the question, can we trust history as we have received it? That's always a good question. And here, the accounts that we've gone over that we're going to source from tonight, there's a basic main story. It kind of follows the pattern of a lot of these mysteries. There's the basic main story that's been documented because these were investigated by official entities at the time.
Yeah.
Who come to no conclusion. Well, there are some conclusions, but you have to pick one that you like the best. But there's a lot of details that you think like, well, they got some of the details are conflicting between these accounts and maybe it doesn't matter. But a lot of these things, they do matter because these are like clues in a criminal mystery here, perhaps. And one little thing, it's like, well, was something smashed on purpose? Was it an accident? Was it the weather? Because it shows intent. And so a lot of these little details I found that, and some of them conflicting, are very important. But, you know, we're going to have to decide who to believe because that's what we're left with. So anyway, that's one of the great sources. It's a terrific article. We'll have a link to that in our show notes, of course. But that is from the Historical Blindness podcast titled The Carroll A. Deering Ghost Ship of Cape Hatteras from January 9th, 2018. And there's another source that Nate has cited that I just read there. It's just a chapter from another book, a compendium of great North Carolina coastal stories called An Outer Banks Reader, edited by David Stick. And there's a whole chapter on the Carroll A. Deering. And it's from the time, this is actually an interesting source because this ended up as a radio program in the 40s.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and it's authored by John Hardin, I believe. Now, it gives a date of 1921, which would make it very contemporaneous, but I think he started maybe compiling these stories, had a keen interest in this mystery, and so started collecting newspaper articles, accounts, I think court documents, and testimony. And as the chapter says here, John Hardin, while serving as executive secretary to Governor R. Gregg Cherry in the 1940s, collected unusual stories and broadcast them into a radio program called Tales of Tarheelia over a Raleigh radio station. So all things Tar Heel, all things North Carolina. And it goes on to say, in the following piece, based on one of his programs and published in 1949 as part of the, quote, The Devil's Tramping Ground and Other Stories, Hardin deals with the most baffling shipwreck in the history of the Outer Banks. I think that part's true. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool.
So great little chapter. A lot of the details. Doesn't have all of the details, though, that the book that you're going to describe next has in it.
Yeah. So this book, again, this was a source that I found from Nate's website and from his episode on this. It was called, and I just want to say, if he hears this, I have not heard his episode on this topic.
Right.
And if it's a case like this where we're covering something that someone else has covered, I actually, and I think Forrest does this too, we go out of our way not to listen to the other person's coverage because we don't want to ape anything or be accused of aping anything. We're going to come at it from our own direction. But we sure as heck were very much interested in the sources that Nate listed because he uses very reliable sources. And one of them that he suggested was this book called Ghost Ship of Diamond Shoals, The Mystery of the Carroll A. Deering by Bland Simpson.
Another great name.
Yeah, I know. It's just great. Bland is pretty cool, actually. This was published in 2002 by the UNC Press. That's the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. It's an amazing book. It's actually a blend of nonfiction and historical fiction. The approach is really great. And I'll describe that a little further here in a second. But I want to say that it has extensive research with dates and information. And Bland Simpson is actually a professor. He grew up near the Outer Banks in Elizabeth City, North Carolina. And he teaches creative writing at UNC to this day, as far as I can tell, and is also a member of the Tony Award-winning band, the Red Clay Ramblers. The guy is a legend. And in fact, I kind of figured he was a big deal at UNC, and our former guest, Tom Maxwell, who we had on for the Bloodfall series, also from Chapel Hill, and the former lead singer of the Squirrel Nut Zippers, had Professor Simpson for a class at UNC and has also seen the Red Clay Ramblers perform. Yeah. So it's all full circle here.
It's all
in the
connected.
North Carolina Mafia, as they say.
An amazing coincidence. And yes, and we're back to a very mysterious and dangerous spot of North Carolina right off the coast. So much lore that keeps dragging us back because this is pretty close to the area where Roanoke happened.
The state has a lot of interesting history. I love it. Obviously, I live here. And a lot of people have done a good job of documenting it and researching it over time. And again, this book was one of the best sources we could get. So we, of course, tracked it down, and we'll have a link to places where you can buy it in our show notes. It's available on Amazon still. There's some used copies, but there's also appears to be new paperbacks I think you can still get. So if you like the story, when we get done with it, you'll have to read it because we're only covering part of it. And Simpson's book gets into much greater depth. The historical nonfiction stuff in his book really colors out how the conversations might have taken place between some of the characters that this affected the most, this loss. Because, what you said, Forrest, is interesting to me too, because you were like, well, there's a lot of documentation and investigation, and there is, and it's there for two reasons. Loss of life and money, and probably not in that order. This was an expensive ship. In fact, I think it was $250,000 to build it. That's $1921. So today that would be almost $4.5 million. So this was quite a ship.
Oh, indeed, and large at 2,114 tons, I believe, a cargo ship, and one of the last, if not the last, commercial masted schooners,
because the steamships were coming along.
That's right.
So what's happening is there were wooden schooners that were used to ship cargo, and steamships had been invented, and they were just getting to the point, and there was still some overlap happening. And you can only imagine what this was like anytime some completely new form of transportation comes along, and the old ones are kind of at their peak. I mean, these ships were unbelievable. And the Deering that we're talking about tonight, it was 250 feet, which is huge. That is a huge vessel, folks. That's a 25-story building on its side. If you wanted to, and imagine 5 masts. And Perini Navy is making boats like this now to this day. It was one of those that actually just in a fluke sank suddenly while it was on a mooring or anchored in a harbor in, I think it was Italy.
Oh, yeah, that's right. And only a couple of people survived only, I think.
Yeah, it was a bad situation. But anyway, so I digress, something we haven't said in a while. But I know in the course of reading Professor Simpson's book, one of the ships that was in there was another captain that was friendly with one of the captains we'll talk about tonight. That guy was the captain of the Wyoming. There was another captain that one of the captains we'll be talking about tonight was friends with, who was a captain of a ship called the Wyoming.
Yeah.
And I went to look that one up, and they were trading war stories and also talking about some of the crew members and what you do if you have crew that's unruly. And the captain of the Wyoming is pretty amazing. When I looked that ship up, that was the largest wooden sailing vessel ever built.
Yeah.
450 feet long.
Wow.
450 feet. I believe that's longer than the yacht Jeff Bezos just had built. So I think his is 417, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
So these are amazing, and they're just beautiful. You just can't beat what a beautiful wooden schooner looks like with all the masts and the sails, and it's just amazing. And that one actually wound up sinking not too long after this as well. But there were things about that one, and even about the Deering that we'll hear about. They were so long and made of wood that they kind of flexed a fair amount, even while at sea.
Right.
And that's one of those things, I think I've mentioned this on the show before, but when I rode the Cyclone at Coney Island, which was is a wooden roller coaster. I don't know if it's still there or in operation, but I remember when we got on it, they were like, yeah, you don't want to ride it on a cold day. It snaps your neck up there on like turn number 4. But on a warm day, it's a lot more comfortable to ride the Cyclone.
Because it's bending.
Because the wood is bending. Yes.
Yeah.
Just crazy. So anyway, it's an interesting time. These ships are a dying breed. And in fact, the captain at the center of tonight's story is one who came out of retirement and got wrapped up in this fascinating legend.
Yeah, and paid with his life, perhaps. We'll see. Or maybe, don't want to say it just yet, but is somewhere else, let's say. In another dimension. There, I said it. Now, the idea here, though, is that it's a real transition of times where we have the industrial age coming to bear in the maritime industry, let's say. And I guess it's kind of a green option here that I guess Greta Thunberg would be happy. It's a sailing ship that's used commercially, so you're not burning a lot of oil. On the other hand, it was hauling coal. So,
it was filled with coal, tons of coal.
That was its purpose, but it's still useful in this age, but being phased out. So this is kind of the end of an era here.
They're bringing that back now. They're building new cargo ships, full-blown tankers, I think, in addition to cargo and tankers that are sail-powered or have sails. Not the whole thing is not powered, but they're capable of traveling under sail power alone with large, sail-by-wire sails that are, huge.
Well, talking about sail-by-wire, another thing that struck me as odd, and it does figure into tonight's mystery, because one of the first things I wondered is why such a large ship like this would only have a crew of 10, 11 including the captain, I believe.
I think at this point, they had things pretty well sewed up with the lines and the organization. Yeah. They've got 5 masts to deal with. All 5 of them are pretty much identical. So you're going to figure out what you're doing to furl and unfurl the sails on those 5. And, the more complicated sails, but there's only a few of them are smaller, are the jibs up in the front.
Right.
I think a well-organized crew could handle that.
Yeah, it's enough, because that's these other ships that were of this size and capacity also had these smaller crews. I just, from the movies, you look at a crew and there's like 50 guys on board. I'm exaggerating. But, a crew of 20 to maybe 30 people on something that large to handle all that. And on the flip side, with today's technology, as you were talking about, when I briefly kind of worked with Disney, that's back when I think Roy Disney had just purchased a beautiful mega yacht sailing vessel, and I said, oh, he must have a crew. He's like, well, it's not that large because this is sail by wire, as you were saying. You want the sails up? Punch a button. Oh, you want this to drop the anchor? Punch a button.
Well, if you watch Below Deck Sailing that's on Bravo, or if you ever see that show, or Peacock, I guess, wherever that you can see it, That's a Perini Navi sailing boat, Perininavi. It's an Italian boat builder. That's a sail-by-wire boat, and it's pretty cool. So they can raise and lower all the sails with buttons and trim the boom and everything. So like the only time that the deck crew on that has to worry about lines is when they're going into a marina or casting off. The rest of the time, the boat is pretty much doing everything, which is pretty wild.
Well, I just wondered in that figure of speech, safety in numbers, if there had been more people aboard, more crew members, if this situation, this mystery may not have happened, or if it would have happened no matter how many people were on board. But as we'll get into tonight, there was only one life form left on board, but we'll save that surprise for a little bit here. So let's get into your next point here. Talk about the Outer Diamond Shoals, where it was found, or kind of the location.
Yeah, so this is on the Outer Banks, and for, a lot of people on the East Coast, for the most part, I'm going to go ahead and say most people on the East Coast of the United States are familiar with the Outer Banks because a lot of people travel there or want to or have in the past. For those of you that are maybe out west and haven't been to the Carolinas, or those of you that are listening from across the pond or in other parts of the world, the Outer Banks are barrier islands on the eastern border of the state of North Carolina. And when you look at the shape of North Carolina on a map and you see the far right edge of it and you think, oh, well, that's the edge of the state, but it's not really. It's a strip of barrier islands that's about 200 miles long. And they're pretty narrow. They're very skinny. They're like the Florida Keys or any other, archipelago almost, except that they're connected. There's a road on them, like the Keys, where you can get out to it. But on the backside of that, there's 30 miles of Pamlico Sound before you get back to marshy sort of mainland on the eastern part of North Carolina. So there's a huge sound behind them. Now, in some places, they're as narrow as 150 to 500 feet. At their widest parts are maybe 2 to 3 miles across. Their average width overall is 1 mile. And their shapes constantly changing, just like the shoals are, because of erosion, because of the weather, because of hurricanes, king tides, all kinds of things. They change a lot. I mean, overall, they're not significantly different than they've been for a long time, but the skinny parts get skinnier and sometimes the thicker parts get thicker. And you may have even seen on the news in some of the areas, the houses are falling into the sea, even in the past few weeks, because of the erosion.
Right. Well, we got into that a little bit too with our Roanoke series.
That's right.
It was hard to kind of gauge where these people originally settled or some parts of the settlement because the waves, the erosion, the water, the wind has changed the land dramatically since that time, certainly.
Right.
And so we're getting a little bit of that as well here, but still treacherous and known as the graveyard of the Atlantic.
That's right, the graveyard of the Atlantic. And also, I want to mention the town where the houses are falling in is called Rodanthe. It's spelled Rodanthe, but we pronounce it Rodanthe. Those houses are like, you can go online and see them, waves breaking under them, because unfortunately they've outlived their ability to survive. But yes, out here, the Outer Banks, what you see stickers on all the cars, and it's OBX. That's what everybody refers to it as. Another famous thing with the Outer Banks, the Wright brothers, their first powered flight at Kitty Hawk that's the Outer Banks.
Because it has constant,
there's beautiful
constant
beaches.
wind too, right, coming offshore.
Yeah, that's right. And there's beautiful beaches there. There's a lot of history there. There's in Chincoteague, which is up to the north, there's wild horses that live on the beach that people come from all over the world to see. It's really amazing. But as Forrest said a minute ago, it is also a place of death.
Yeah.
It is the graveyard of the Atlantic, as they say. And there's more than a few places called that, but in my mind, this is the real one, the one off the coast of North Carolina. I guess there's an area in Nova Scotia called that too, but I think you guys need to come up with a different name.
Well, the Atlantic.
I'm talking to you, Jordan, nighttime.
Yes.
We'll see if he hears
Well,
this.
no, the Atlantic is known, especially the North Atlantic, of course, but the Atlantic is known for its very stormy and treacherous seas. And I've talked to sailors like, Pacific, like peaceful. That's the name, Pacific, pacified. Right. Atlantic, different story, just because of the weather here. But especially in that spot, though, where as the colonies were becoming fortified and populated, of course, a lot of ships, and we're talking since the late 1400s, early 1500s, coming ashore there. You've got now hundreds of years of shipwrecks, and all not just due to weather, piracy, explosions, fires, mismanagement by the crew. And so perhaps some of these factors were also involved in the mystery of the Deering.
Yeah, and one of the most dangerous parts of the Outer Banks is the Diamond Shoals, which we'll be talking about tonight. And the largest and most dangerous one of those is the Outer Diamond, which is where this ship ran aground. Now, the diamond shoals range from 10 to 14 miles long. They stick out off of a point of the Outer Banks, and they have varying widths. The water there can be as shallow as 3 to 5 feet. Now, the draft of the Carroll Deering is not readily available, but it would have likely been at least 20 feet.
For a draft.
So there's no way it could have passed over the shoal. It would have to go around, as all vessels would.
And shoal being just a large sandbar, or where the
Exactly.
the depth is very shallow, but you have wind and waves building these mounds, these long strips of basically sandbars, where it's just very easy to not spot them and get your ship trapped, and then you get pounded by waves, and then you're in trouble.
Yeah, what's wild about these shoals is they're actually 20 to 30 square miles at any given time and constantly changing. And to your point, Forrest, about other famous ships and mysteries that have happened here, over 5,000 ships have been lost in the area they refer to as the graveyard of the Atlantic, which is really kind of the entire east coast of North Carolina. But this area is where the wrecks are most concentrated. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp.
And I'm sure many of us have heard that adopting an attitude of gratitude has many beneficial effects, from improving one's emotional and mental health to boosting happiness and manifesting prosperity. So in light of that, and in light of that Thanksgiving is coming up, I'd like to take a moment to thank someone who's really helped me and others in what has been a difficult year. And that's my good buddy, Scott Philbrook. Whenever I've been struggling or just need to vent, he's been there to pick up the slack and lend a helping hand and a sympathetic ear. So he's the one who really keeps this show going, folks. So big thanks to you, brother.
Oh, man, that's nice. I wouldn't expect
Yeah,
you.
sure.
Well, this is the month for gratitude, as it should be every month. But now is a good time for all of us to take a moment to thank someone we probably don't thank nearly enough on a regular basis. And that's thanking ourselves. With everything that's going on in the world right now, with all the tension and uncertainty, it's easy to forget and remind ourselves that we're usually doing the best we can. And as Zen teaches you, you need to go easy on yourself, forgive, and give yourself a break, because it ain't easy to figure this all out. And it may not seem like it, but you're doing it. You need to remember all that you've accomplished so far. And if you just keep chipping away at it, you'll get done what you need to. Embrace those small moments when you realize you're actually feeling all right, and that all things considered, all is well, or it will be.
Yeah, I think so. And remembering all that is what keeps me going. Well, I keep trying to anyway. Look, negative feelings of worry and anxiety can always pop up, but there are skills you can learn to manage it. And if you need help, that's just a few clicks away in the form of therapy with BetterHelp.
BetterHelp is entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule.
You just need to fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge.
Let the gratitude flow with BetterHelp.
Visit BetterHelp.com/astonishing today to get 10% off your first month.
That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/astonishing.
There are a lot of things about aging that, well, they just don't seem fair. Like the unexplained aches and pains, the lessening of mental acuity. And for many guys, you start getting hair in places you never had it before and you don't want it. Every place except where you do want it, on your head. I mean, what's up with that? I mean, nature's way of keeping our ears warmer but not our heads seems kind of counterproductive. How'd that happen? And over-reliance on fur hats by our caveman ancestors?
Well, you can't do much about the other things you mentioned, and a hat will hide the hair loss, but you don't always want to be wearing a hat. T-shirt in the pool guy? Fine. But T-shirt and a hat in the pool? Not a great look. But there is good news. You can do something about hair loss with Hims.
Look, hair loss for a lot of guys is pretty common and unavoidable, but Hims makes restoring your hair simple and effective. With Hims hair loss solutions, you'll be joining hundreds of thousands of subscribers who got their flow back.
Hims provides access to a range of hair loss treatments that actually work, all from the comfort of your couch.
Yeah, these are doctor-trusted treatment options that have clinically proven ingredients like finasteride and minoxidil that can regrow hair in as little as 3 to 6 months, just in time for next summer.
And you can find the solution options that work best for you, like personalized chewable, oral, spray, and serum treatments.
The process is simple and 100% online. Just answer a few questions and a medical provider will determine if treatment is right for you. If prescribed, your treatment is sent directly to your door.
Hims has hundreds of thousands of trusted subscribers, so if you feel like you're losing a part of yourself with your hair loss, get Hims and get your confidence back.
Start your free online visit today at hims.com/AL.
That's HIMS.com/AL for your personalized hair loss treatment options.
hims.com/AL.
Results vary based on studies of topical and oral minoxidil and finasteride.
Prescription products require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if a prescription is appropriate.
Restrictions apply.
See website for full details and important safety information.
Hi, this is Corey in Washington, D.C., and while I'm parsing big data, I enjoy listening to Astonishing Legends. Let's get back to the show.
So in the cold open, you heard a little bit about how the Deering was discovered. Let's get more specific on that. One of the surfmen on the early morning watch at the U.S. Coast Guard's Cape Hatteras Station 183, C.P. Brady, was scanning the horizon on his shift, which was between 4 and 8 a.m. This was January 31st, 1921. So he's on the second floor of this building up there. And they had a telescope, and I guess it was one of only 3 telescopes that any of the Coast Guard stations had on the coast that were purchased for the War of 1812, which... So at this point, they're 110 years old, but they still coveted it, I guess, because it's pretty hard to see out there, especially if the weather's bad.
The waves can be so large, ships can actually disappear between waves.
Yes.
Your line of vision here. But 1812, looking out for Brits. Coming to stomp on
exactly.
us again.
He's out there, he's looking through the telescope, and he sees what he thinks is a ship, but then the waves are back and forth, and he can't really make it out. He keeps looking. And then it turns out there is something out there. And so he decides that he needs to talk to the commander of the post. And he gets everyone involved. They confirm that something's out there. So now they have to get to it. So in your mind's eye, you might be thinking, what? Okay, so you're on the beach. You look out, you see a boat. How hard can it be to get out? Well, the Outer Diamond Shoal is, as best as I can tell from Google Earth anyway, is 5 or 6 miles from the coast. At least it is now. And it might have been different in 1921, but it probably wasn't too different. And so that's a long ways out. So they can see that far with the telescope, but getting out there is another thing. So they got to take what they call a surf boat down to the water. And this thing's on a giant like wagon type chassis. And they've got this huge Belgian horse, like a workhorse that brings it down. So he's got the blinders on because they don't want it to freak out from the surf, which was bad at this point. So the horse is pulling this giant boat down. And when you think about like how big of a boat is it, what does it look like? Well, if you saw the Titanic movie, it looks like one of those lifeboats from Titanic. That's how big. It's a big wooden boat. So the horse pulls it down. And then when it gets near the surf, I guess, they disconnect the front axle, which are like wagon wheels. And the horse pulls that around and goes away. The front of the wagon thing that it's on, that turns into skids so they can just slide the boat down into the surf. Now, this boat did have an engine. It had a motor, but it also had oars. And so they've got to get it out in the surf just to get past the surf to get to 4 or 5 miles away where they can see this large ship stuck in the sand. They go out there, and according to Simpson in his book, it's just repeated attempts to get it into the water. And they can't do it. Now, so think about this. The Deering was sighted at 5:30 a.m. They actually didn't get out past the breakers and out towards where this ship was until 11:30, 6 hours later, because it took them that long. Now, when you think about a hard job, folks, like there's a really amazing picture. We'll have it. It's public domain, so I'm pretty sure we're going to have it on our webpage. It's beautiful, scanned at high resolution shot of the guys who were on duty when this happened. At least I know that Surfman Baxter, I believe, is in the photo, and he's one of the ones that went out to the Deering. And the other thing that's interesting is when you start looking into these various ships disappearing and the accidents and all of that stuff, this same photo of these guys is like it's the cover photo for like 15 different things that went haywire, because that's all that was going on there. These were the guys that ran into the ocean after a storm and brought people ashore.
Well, of course, there are rough seas and coastlines everywhere, but I often think of the Australian lifeguards and those life-saving teams, and they got the dories, and they're trying to row out there, and you might not think as a landlubber, well, how hard could it be? You got a big boat, right? And a motor, like how hard can it be? Well, if you've ever been body surfing, boogie boarding, surfing, swimming out in a ocean with just 3 to 4 foot waves, and you're bobbing up and down, it's relentless. And you will realize quickly how futile it is to try and get past that. You just keep getting pummeled one after the other by wave after another wave after another wave. And
Yes.
and then you feel like your life's in danger. So just imagine being in a boat with much larger waves and bobbing up and down. You just can't get out there. And that's also why people, when they fall into the ocean, sadly, you'll see if there's waves coming in, Hawaii, California coast, they get battered against the rocks because you cannot get out there. And a lot of times people who go to save them also end up injured or killed. So just very dangerous, and they could not get out there. I just want to point this out. I'm sure you've got it in your notes, but in mine, just that the weather at this point, I believe you can confirm with me that the weather was calm, except the seas were rough.
Essentially what happened is when the ship probably ran aground, the weather was okay. But then it started getting rough and the tiny ship was tossed. Sorry. Then it started getting rough and they were unable to get out there to it, even though when it crashed, for lack of a better term, it probably wasn't that bad at that point. But there had been storms prior, and then this weather afterwards was not good. So they were having a lot of trouble, and so much trouble that they had to get the teams of surfmen to come from 2 other stations as well. So it took a lot of folks to get the boat out there and get it into the water. When they get out there and they get as close as they can to the ship, but they're still like a mile away from it because of the rough seas. And the shoals are dangerous. They don't want the surf boat to get stuck either, because then they'll need help. So they can't get close to it. But one thing they did see on that first day was that the davits were empty. They had 2 boats that the ship had. They were gone. And a davit is like a crane type device that you use to lower a boat over the side. So they could see that something had been lowered, but that was nowhere in sight. They couldn't see anybody on deck, and they couldn't even get close enough to read the name on the transom. So they had to abandon the cause after all of that and return to shore.
Right.
I actually want to read this telegram that Simpson published in his book. This is pretty cool. This is on page 11 of Ghost Ship of Diamond Shoals by Bland Simpson. Telegram to HQ in D.C., U.S. Coast Guard 7th District Headquarters, Pasquotank River, Elizabeth City, North Carolina, Monday, January 31st, 1921, 4:33 p.m. Coast Guard, Washington, D.C., unknown 5-masted schooner, stranded, Diamond Shoals, sails set, boats gone, no signs of life, sea rough, stations number 183, 184, 186, unable to board schooner, 1,630 hours, 7th District. So it's pretty fascinating, and that's, 183, those were the guys that saw it. They had to get help from 184 and 186 just to get in the water. So unknown ship, we still don't know what it is. By the way, another thing I want to mention about Professor Simpson's book is that he's got a timeline at the back of it, which is awesome. It's just everything that happened, so well researched. It's really great to have that, all the times that the ship was seen, who they ran into along the way, the weirdness, all spelled out on different days. So it's really cool. Like I said, great book. You got to check it out. So the next day, the surf boat goes out again, still cannot get to the ship. They try but can't. So now a Coast Guard cutter has arrived. And that's the Seminole. And the Seminole is prominent in all these stories. And it's pretty much always out there. When something's going wrong, the Seminole's there. But it's out there far enough that they can spend the night on it. And that saves them from having to try to get past the breakers anymore. So the surfmen spend the night on the Seminole. The next morning, February 2nd, it gets as close as possible to the ship. And it puts the surf boat in the water for them. Still 3/4 of a mile away for safety. And it still cannot get to this ship. So as they're trying to get it out there, they can't get to it. They come back. And then the Seminole has problems with her boiler, which is what makes her go. So she has to retreat to Wilmington, North Carolina. Now, Wilmington is a port city at the mouth of the Cape Fear River. It's about 150 miles to the southwest, not far from the southern border of North Carolina with South Carolina. On February 3rd, nothing happens. The cutter is laid up in Wilmington, and they're still trying to figure out what they're going to do next. February 4th, this is 4 full days after the ship ran aground, a salvage wrecker ship named the Rescue out of Norfolk arrives, and they manage to identify and board the ship. The waters have calmed down considerably. It's at this point we find out that it is the Carroll A. Deering, a 5-masted schooner, 255 feet long with a 44-foot beam and a 25-foot depth. And as Forrest said earlier, 2,114 tons. And there's a lot of pictures of this vessel online. Hopefully we'll be able to use some of those too on our website. It is gorgeous. It is a beautiful boat. As a former sailor, when I saw this thing, it actually kind of took my breath away. I was like, this is a really beautiful piece of woodwork. It's a gorgeous ship. So it came out of the G.G. Deering Company in Bath, Maine. There's a lot of shipbuilders in Maine. And they had a lot of ships called the Deering. They had various names in Deering. This one was named for one of the sons of the family, Carroll, Carroll. One of the sons who ironically never went to sea, apparently.
No, but
there might be bad luck. I don't know. They're very superstitious lot.
No, we've talked a
mariners.
lot about that before, the maritime folks being superstitious and like all the little things they do and don't do because it's bad luck, because it is a very treacherous business. But according to the Evening Express out of Portland, Maine, the newspaper here, they had an article titled "Namesake of Bath-Built Ghost Ship Deering Dies." So Carroll A. Deering, for whom that ship was named, he lived to be 84 years old and died in March of 1967. So his dad named the ship after him. And to get to do that, I think he built around 99 ships, or that company did, the Gardner G. Deering Company. And they were headquartered out of Bath, Maine. So a little bit inland, about 35 miles northeast of Portland, Maine, I believe.
When they get to discover the ship, that it is the Carroll Deering, it is plowed fully into the Outer Diamond Shoal. The captain of the rescue, the salvage vessel, estimated it to be at least 14 feet deep down into the sand at the bow. In fact, the deck up near the front was closer to the water than it was in the back, and that's because it was just getting pounded from the back by the wind and the waves for days and days. So that's just continually driving it like a hammer driving a nail into a piece of wood. All the sails were up too, so that's not helping. That's pushing it further into the sand as well, except for the flying jib, which would be that forwardmost triangular sail you see generally attached to the tip of the bowsprit. So it was fully underway when it hit the shoal, which is weird because there's nobody on it. Why is it rigged to go full speed?
Okay, so that's another clue to this mystery here, is that if you have all these sails, which I guess if you wanted to rig or have the wind help you out of being grounded, you would have had those sails up. So it was like they weren't trying to use the wind to help themselves get unstuck.
Right, because there are steps you can take to get unstuck, and there's steps you can take to avoid as well, and it didn't seem like those steps have been taken either. It's kind of like when you get to the car accident and you're investigating the accident, somebody is at fault, and the first thing you check for is skid marks. Did they ever even apply the brakes?
Exactly. So there are things that you can look for here. In this case, it would seem to indicate that they perhaps were not on board when the ship was grounded.
Right. So Professor Simpson says that the boarding party described the ship as undulating in the surf. So imagine the deck bending with the waves, like making wooden waves of its own as it's, starting to come apart.
And the two ends, the fore and the aft, twisting independently. So it's being wrung out like a dish rag.
It's so large, and there's so much wood, and there's so much twisting and turning that you are constantly pumping the bilge. Water is coming into the ship all the time. And for a lot of folks who don't know this, essentially one of the things you learn when you're at sea is that all boats leak. All boats have water coming into them. That's why you have bilge pumps, and it's why it's bad if the bilge pumps stop working, because you can't stop the water from coming in most cases. So with these wooden vessels, you can just imagine them twisting and turning, even when they're at sea under perfect conditions, and water is going to seep through a little bit, and you've got to fight to get it back out of there so you can get where you're going. Well, the Deering was unrecoverable by tug. It was too buried. It was a total loss. And on top of that, here's the other interesting thing. We'll talk a little bit more about its journey here in a minute. It had no cargo aboard. It was returning from a delivery of coal that it had taken down to Rio. But at this point, it was empty, which means in addition to sitting high in the water, it also would have been able to move faster. And then on top of that, it didn't have a lot of value beyond the value of the vessel itself. So that's something to think about if we get to talking about piracy or ulterior motives with this.
Right. Think of the reasons for that. Also, no major holes in it. I'm not spoiling any kind of conclusions here, but people thought, well, was it a leftover mine from World War I?
Right.
Because this is around that time frame. And perhaps they hit a mine and they had to abandon ship quickly. The other thing, the lifeboats, I believe the lines, as they're called on a ship, not ropes, the lines were cut. So what they noticed was it was not a panicked departure, but perhaps a hasty one.
Right.
Orderly for the most part, but determined, let's say, to get off that boat. But why? That's the big question. So what you're looking at here, those no major catastrophe to the ship at this point, other than now it's getting battered by wind and wave. And so, what you're seeing here is there's no value, perhaps, in a large scale, other than perhaps the boat itself.
Right.
That also ties into some theories we're going to get to at the end, of course. And like all great ghost ship lore, you got to have food left out. Like, wait, is there somebody here to finish this meal? Like, who's the kettle's whistling? But in this case, they're still looking for people on board because they want to know, like, is this abandoned yet? Are people down below decks? What's going on here? And so as they're investigating and crawling over with a fine-tooth comb every inch of the ship for clues, they do see that food is left out and was being prepared, right?
That's right. There was a pot of pea soup. There were some spare ribs in a pan, and there was coffee in a pot on the stove. The stove was not on. Right. And I don't know what kind of stove it was. It wasn't there, but there was no indication that it was hot coffee, but that there was coffee in a pot on the stove. So
so for my reading, it was like food had been recently served, and also it was planned for either later that day or the next day.
Yes.
Essentially, what we're seeing here is that it wasn't as if things were being stowed because it was going to be departed or abandoned, and they had time to do that. It seemed, like I said, that was my point here, was kind of hasty, but not totally panicked. No signs of violence, as we know, just that it was kind of left there and purposefully.
Oh, that's right. So that's what's going on in the galley. And then up on the deck, the steering gear had also been completely destroyed. The wheel was broken, and the binnacle had been smashed. Now, for folks who don't know what a binnacle is, you've all seen it. You probably just didn't know it was called that. There's some of you that will know, but that's the compass housing. That's like if you've ever toured a ship in a shipyard or at a museum or something like that. It's a big, usually kind of a big R2-D2 almost looking thing that has glass on it, and you look into it, and there's a compass down inside. The binnacle protects the ship's compass, and it also magnetically shields it so that you don't like take a bad reading and wind up going to Tahiti when you went to be in Maui or whatever. But it's lighted generally, so you can see at night, and it has adjustments so you can calibrate it for corrections. And then it's something that is absolutely critical to navigation. So why was it destroyed? And in addition to that, not too far from it, they found a 9-pound sledgehammer. So it did appear that maybe someone had taken the sledgehammer to the binnacle and purposefully destroyed this critical navigation aid. The rudder was also severely damaged, but that could have been from it being pounded by the storm and the wind and the waves while it was stuck. So it wasn't clear whether or not what had happened with the rudder was some kind of sabotage or intentional damage, or it happened after, because they couldn't get on it for 4 or 5 days. And it was, it went through several tide cycles during that.
Yeah. What's obvious here, though, is that it wasn't all just natural damage, organic damage. Somebody tried to disable the sailing capability of this ship. Now, why? And of course, the first thing you think is like as they left or as they're departing, or it had happened to the ship while the original crew was there that they did not want to happen because they still wanted to sail it home.
Right.
Somebody wrecked this thing because they did not want that ship sailable.
Right.
That's obvious. And so they don't know what the sledgehammer that was there, they don't know if that was there to destroy it or if it was there to like just make repairs under duress, under some kind of a disaster scenario, but it was definitely stove in, as the description says, and that somebody damaged it purposefully.
Yeah.
But why and when and for what purpose?
The other thing that was really unusual about this was that the tenders were missing, and tenders being boats that you use to go ashore from a large vessel like this, because you can't always get it right up to the beach or to the marina, depending on where you're going. They had a dory, which is a smaller tender that was missing. It's something Forrest referenced a minute ago, a dory. And then they also had a 24-foot yawl. Now, a yawl has 2 masts, has a tall main, and then a shorter, smaller mast aft. Now, the cool thing about yawls, and it's YAWL, is that they're...
Oh, you're not just saying
I'm just saying
in a southern
y'all.
way, everybody.
Y'all, welcome
y'all.
to North Carolina. The cool thing about yawls is that they're easy to maneuver, so they're good for coastal sailing, but they're stable, too, for open or blue water sailing. They're kind of all-purpose. They're great for racing, too. So this tells you how big the Deering was, though. One of the go-ashore boats was a double-masted 24-foot sailboat. So that tells you how big the Deering was. Anyway, both of those were missing. They were both missing. And the other thing that was really strange, and this is one of the things that I thought was super strange, actually, was there were several lights on the ship. There were the running lights on the edge of the deck, most likely, or on the bow, and they were burned out. And then 2 emergency red lights, which would have been up on top of a couple of the masts. And that signals that you're a hazard to navigation or you're having trouble. Those were burned out too. So all 4 of those were burned out. And what's strange about that is, first of all, those lights last forever. Secondly, why would all 4 of them be burned out at once? Because we already know, and we'll find this out in the timeline, it was underway and doing and sighted by other vessels just a day or two earlier. So It doesn't make sense for those bulbs to be, it's not like it had been sitting there for weeks and months and years. So that's a little bit strange that all 4 of the lights were burned out.
What's baffling about that is that it seems like they were all lit simultaneously.
Yes.
So you have running lights and then you have emergency lights. Those are way up high, I believe, on the rigging for other ships to see.
That's right. Way up high. And you know what, Forrest, you just made me think of? Having all those lights on might have been an active consideration by whoever set it off by itself to help other mariners avoid running into it, even though they knew they were trying to wreck it, maybe not wanting to cause an intentional collision with this unmanned vessel.
Perhaps, but that was intentional. So all of these lights are lit.
Yeah.
The emergency lights indicate an out-of-control vessel, so to either stay away from it and also get help.
Yeah.
And it's just a signal. So we know those were burning and for a while.
Right.
Again, this is part of the mystery. It's like, okay, so you're going to damage it so it can't be sailed. Like, okay, so it gets boarded by rescue craft. And it's like, well, you're going to want to sail this thing back, even if everybody had to leave.
Right.
Why would you render it inoperable?
Yeah.
But also signal that you're in trouble,
right,
that this thing should be boarded. So just another mystery. But maybe you're right in that it was a maritime courtesy thing because the seas are so treacherous.
The converse point, though, is maybe they weren't just burned out. They didn't have a lot of time to examine it. It was in danger.
Right.
I can't imagine how much time they actually spent on it. I'm not sure. I know that they salvaged some items, so maybe they were there for a few hours. But the other thing is maybe they were intentionally burned out somehow so that it could crash in darkness and never be found.
Well, there you go.
But I don't know how you wouldn't intentionally burn it out. You would just disconnect it or disable it somehow from, if your ship's engineer maybe would know where the wires came down. And that might have been something that they didn't have a chance to investigate because they had limited time. So their perception of them being burned out, it could have been another reason why they weren't lit.
Perhaps. Yeah, you'd have to look into that.
Disconnected from the battery. It could be anything.
Yeah, we don't really know why other than they were non-functional.
Right.
Yeah, it could be another part of sabotage where you don't want it to be found because ships not wanting to be found, we're going to come across that as well.
That makes more sense than them being lit and all 4 burning out in a matter of 24 or 36 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, we're professional investigators, folks. Just, we're going to have this all figured out by the end of this. I know nobody, it's been 100 years, but we're going to figure it out right now.
Mystery solved. So I was watching TV.
I'll alert the media.
John Gielgud and Arthur. Nice.
Yeah, not so great.
Yeah, good enough. Look, I saw an ad for Squarespace, and I thought they had a great tagline. A website makes it real. Now, I know they're saying that the power of a Squarespace website can help make your dreams a reality, and that's true. But I also thought of another angle, which is if you're checking out someone's business or art or, their music, food, crafts, what have you, if they have a slick looking website, it does a lot to make them seem like the real deal. Like if they went to the effort of crafting a great website, then they must put that effort into what they produce.
Oh, I get you now. And I agree. The more professional looking, the more features and functionality, the more a visitor can find out about you, and the easier it is to consume what you're creating. The more they have confidence, interest, and interaction in what you're putting out there. A Squarespace website makes you too legit to Command Q.
Oh, Command Q. I get, yes. Nice.
Yes. Right. Okay.
Okay.
Command Q.
Oh, nice.
Too legit. All right, yeah.
Yes. Very nice. Once again. And I concur, sir. And the reverse is true. If you have a website and it looks real thin, sus, dodgy, meaning, boring stock photos, zero style or panache, no good way to interact with them, like messaging, or, there's no scheduling function, or the checkout process seems sketchy, like you just gave me your credit card number and you're not sure if it went through or if you're going to get your items. All that totally makes me super wary about doing business with them.
Yeah, and I think dodgy and sketchy are still around, but sus, I don't know. I feel like sus is dead, but glad
I think
you
that's
threw
a
it in there.
UK thing. I was appealing to our UK listeners. Yeah.
Oh, is that what it is?
Maybe.
Okay, well, Squarespace provides all the tools and design you need to give your site visitors 100% confidence in what you're doing. And the first thing your visitors notice is how good everything looks. Well, Squarespace makes you look your best with design intelligence. Squarespace combines 2 decades of industry-leading design expertise with cutting-edge AI technology to unlock your strongest creative potential. Design intelligence empowers anyone to build a beautiful, more personalized website tailored to their unique needs and craft a bespoke digital identity to use across your entire online presence.
Yeah, speaking of trustworthy transactions for you and your visitors, Squarespace Payments is the easiest way to manage your payments in one place with Squarespace. Onboarding is fast and simple. You can get started in just a few clicks and start receiving payments right away. Plus, give your customers more ways to pay with popular payment methods like Klarna, ACH Direct Debit in the US, Apple Pay, Afterpay in the US and Canada, and ClearPay in the UK.
Yeah, and that's a good point for content creators. You want to make sure you aren't dealing with anyone sketchy. So Squarespace's invoicing offers an easier way to collect payments so you can focus on growing your business. Invoice clients and get paid for your services, turn leads into clients with proposals, estimates, and contracts, and simplify your workflow and manage your services business on one platform.
Yep, folks, it's time to make it real, whether it's your ideas and dreams or how your visitors see you.
So just go to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, use squarespace.com/legends and promo code LEGENDS to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain.
Well, I hate to admit it, but there's no denying it. Winter has begun. It's been a lot colder and a lot soggier, and for the first time since last February, there have been days I didn't want to go outside. But I'll tell you, nothing brings a ray of sunshine on even the cloudiest of days like a delivery of First Leaf wines to your doorstep.
Oh yeah, it's guaranteed to bring a smile because First Leaf wines are top shelf, so to speak. And every bottle we've tried has been superbly delicious. The hardest part of the experience is deciding which wine to try first. But no matter what you uncork, you know you're going to enjoy a fine and exciting wine that's perfect for your meal or for just cozying up to the fire or that noisy radiator or that space heater, whatever you got going on.
Yeah, something hot. So hot and warm there. Well, speaking of shelves, I'll admit I'll spend way too much time at the store aisle staring at all the selections and not knowing what's good and taking a risk on something that turns out to be ho-hum. And another great thing about First Leaf is that they got the expert wine knowledge, so you don't have to know anything about wine except your tastes, which means that every bottle I've taken over to a friend's house for dinner, and some of these folks really know their wines, they've always been impressed and delighted, and I get the sophistication points.
Ah, yes, let the charade continue.
Sure.
Although it's hard to part with a First Leaf bottle for yourself.
Right.
And I think that has a lot to do with the wines kind of being bespoke for you because First Leaf is a personalized wine club that knows your wine preferences better than you do. Every month, they'll send you a customized selection of wines that you're guaranteed to love.
I have indeed loved every bottle, and I love the First Leaf process because getting started was so easy and actually fun. I just answered a few quick questions about my wine preferences on their site, and they put together an amazing assortment of top-notch wines just for me. And it all gets delivered right to my door. I mean, what could be better?
Well, maybe not better, but definitely a big plus is how First Leaf lets you control your delivery schedule, so it's super convenient. You can choose exactly when the wine arrives, so you never have to worry about missing a delivery.
Nope, you do not want to miss a delivery. I certainly didn't want to miss the Zinfandel I recently had from Fifth Note Cellars, which paired perfectly with a pot roast.
Well, speaking of the charade of sophistication, I can tell you that Emily and we both prefer white wine. So we put no reds on our questionnaire, and you know what? It didn't matter. I didn't feel unsophisticated when the box arrived because it was a variety of whites and a couple of rosés, and they were all really good. Everything was nice and dry like we like it, and it just all paired perfectly with what they suggested. I couldn't recommend it more. Unfortunately, those 6 bottles didn't last very long that we got.
Well, listen, even if by some remote chance you get a bottle that you don't absolutely love, it's not a problem because First Leaf has a 100% satisfaction guarantee.
You can't beat that. So get cozy and pop open that perfect bottle of wine from First Leaf. Go to tryfirstleaf.com/astonishing to sign up, and you'll get your first 6 hand-picked bottles for just $44.95.
That's tryfirstleaf.com/astonishing.
Tryfirstleaf.com/astonishing.
Hello everyone, I'm Steve Hayes, and this is Astonishing Legends. Let's get back to the show.
All right, so now we have Captain Carlson of the tugboat named Rescue, and he's aboard and he's looking at the clues left. He's examining everything, and of course, one of the most important parts of the ship is what happened to the captain, what happened in his room.
Right.
Captain's in charge of everything. So he goes in there and he finds that there are some clothes of the captain's strewn about.
Yes.
His bed was unmade.
But it was also soaking wet from the waves crashing all over the ship.
Right.
But I think the bed, you would be able to tell if the ocean unmade the bed or the bed actually looked unmade. I think it probably looked unmade.
It goes to point that there was, again, some haste.
Yes.
I'll stop saying the word haste. They were under pressure, I think, to get out of there, but had time to do it in an orderly fashion, it seems, for the most part. But someone had been staying or sleeping in the spare bed that was in the captain's cabin.
That's what they thought. That's what it looked like. They said. They didn't say it for sure, but they said that's what it looked like. Yeah, Captain Carlson said from the tug, yeah.
Yeah, so no one would be allowed in there. He didn't have any visitors or guests.
Yeah.
And unless, well, again, depends on when it was slept in. If Captain Carlson's bunk, his rack, was slept in, and also the spare bedroom or the spare bed, could it be that someone occupied the captain's room but didn't want to sleep in the bed that he slept in?
Right.
So keep that in mind. Well, the other possessions of the captain's were also missing. So his trunk, his steamer trunk, his grip, and a canvas bag were missing. A grip being a smaller bag with your personal effects in it. I guess you can think of it as a larger, like, DOP kit, you know.
Yeah, it's kind of like a briefcase type thing.
A valise. Right. So you keep your more important stuff. Think about an airline pilot when they go on board and they got their kind of their box briefcase with their charts and their maps in it. Something like that, except with more personal effects that the captain would board with, along with his clothing, which would go in the trunk. So
right.
Instead of having all your small items rattling around in that bigger trunk, you have a smaller bag. Well, what's the importance of that? Well, the other guys on the ship would know that it's the captain's shaving razor, you know, his combs, you know, just why would you want that if you're taking stuff, unless he had nice stuff, I guess. But it's just kind of like personal items that you wouldn't normally.
Right. To your point, I think this is what you're saying. Don't let me put words in your mouth or thoughts in your brain.
Sure.
But it seems like you're saying it's something that the captain would take, but not necessarily someone else if they were leaving.
Again, you would think so. But then, you know, listen, people, I'll say this throughout, people do weird things. It's like your most intimate personal things that you wouldn't use somebody else's toothbrush. But some guys out there, especially a rustic, salty crew, might do. We had, ivory handled combs and items and stuff. It's like whatever they could sell. So you can't rule that out. But just an odd thing to take unless it was the captain, I would think. That he was going to, again, the trunk was missing, so that's a larger, heavier item.
All of his stuff is gone.
All of his stuff is gone.
Except for some clothes. Yeah.
And so another strange thing, if you're getting on a lifeboat, you wouldn't be taking a big trunk, you would think. You know, you don't need 2 weeks of clothes.
Right.
Perhaps.
Well, certainly not in the dory, but on the yawl, you could have taken it.
The yawl, and if you're the captain, you might have that privilege. But again, if you need to get off the ship rather quickly, it's just something you wouldn't leave behind. Like, when they tell you your airliner has to ditch, you don't bring your computer bag. Like, even though, well, it's my computer, my laptop, all my stuff's on. There's like, sorry, stays in the overhead bin, get off, get down the slide. The other thing that's odd, and there may be a little bit of contention about what room exactly, but there's a small side room next to the captain's cabin. And in that room, 3 pairs of boots were found, which did not belong to the captain.
Right.
So who goes in there to leave their boots? That's another odd thing.
It's a little strange. So on the chart room, they go in there and the ocean chart is there on the table.
Yeah.
Laid out. So the interesting thing about that is if you were leaving and taking all that other stuff, you'd think you would take the ocean chart, except the coastal chart was missing.
Right.
So there's an implication there that whoever made a decision about the chart room decided to take what you would need to go ashore and maybe was in sight of shore when they did that, or close enough that they figured they could find it, versus going back out to blue water sail, in the deep water or whatever. So maybe that's a clue. I would think it would be. I don't know why you would abandon ship without the ocean chart unless you were close to shore of some place that you knew where that shore was.
I think they were confident that not heading out to open sea, but trying to get inland for safety reasons or to disappear. And so what they needed, though, was the coastal charts.
Right.
And again, in that hurry, you don't grab everything. Like I said, well, why not it's an extra roll of paper, grab some ocean charts. Well, you're not going to need them. They knew that.
Right.
Whoever this was. So that's missing. Also, the navigational instruments were missing as well. So the chronometer,
Right.
the log, the charting gear, the sextant, I believe.
Yeah, it said nautical instruments, but I would presume that's a sextant. You're always going to have no matter what the state of your tech is, you always have a sextant in case the tech fails. And so I'm imagining that it's probably that or an equivalent navigational instrument for dead reckoning and that sort of thing. And the chronometer is one of the most important things there is in primitive sailing. You need to know what the time is, to know how fast you're going, where you're. It plays into all parts of navigational computation.
Exactly. So. Since the discovery of longitude. You know, there's a terrific documentary it's all about longitude. Because think about it, folks. Latitude, you know where you are north and south on the globe. But longitude, east to west, measuring that with transatlantic sailing and exploration, you need to know that. And so the most important things were the charting of longitude, like how many degrees are you from your starting point, again, going east or west across the globe. And you need to know how long it takes. So the other really important thing for accurate navigation was a chronometer. Like, how long have you spent going in this one direction?
That's right. And at one point, I can't remember the specifics of it. I think there was either a prize or a reward.
There was,
from the king.
That's I think that's also mentioned.
That might be in the documentary you're talking about. It was to develop a clock because they didn't have electronics at that time. And it was to develop a clock, a pendulum or a weight-oriented clock that could keep time at sea on a rocking ship. And that was a big, big deal when they finally figured that out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you had clocks that worked on weights and measures, like a grandfather clock. But you can't have something like a pendulum on a ship. Just doesn't work. You're walking around. So you need something that keeps really accurate time with some other kind of mechanism back in an age and era when you could not, or it was very difficult to machine fine parts like that for some kind of watch. You need a design. And I believe, this is just off the top of my head, this is documentary came out years ago, decade maybe, and that the prize offered by, I can't remember the king, one of the French kings.
Yeah, I can't remember which one it was.
Oh, we're going to have to look it up now. The prize was equivalent to like $20 million in old-timey money. And the guy won it. It took him like 4 years to build this thing.
Here we go. John Harrison, famous for inventing the marine chronometer as its answer to the problem of finding longitude at sea, for which Parliament had in 1714 offered a reward of 20,000 pounds. 20,000 pounds in 1714 today would be worth 3.58 million pounds.
Okay, well, there you go. Quite a bit of prize money. And the guy did it. And so then you could accurately navigate and chart. So anyway, those are the three things that I had seen. Also a telescope.
Yes.
And the ship's papers were taken. So three important tools, at least. The ship's papers, meaning that whoever left the ship was planning on doing a little bit of navigation themselves to get back to dry land, or again, a hideout place, a safe harbor, just any coastline with population.
Yeah.
One of those. But that was enough foresight to grab those things on the way out.
So then what you get is the rescue, which was the wrecker. And again, this was Captain James Carlson, the first person to successfully board the ship, or among the first group that actually got on it. And as Forrest said, I think it's a tug, but it may have also had salvage gear attached to it, cranes or something like that. So Captain James Carlson of the wrecker was acting on behalf of the Merritt and Chapman Derrick and Wrecking Company, such a great name, to attempt to salvage the Deering. And they were a fairly famous salvage company. Their nickname was the Black Horse of the Sea, which I thought was pretty cool. Man, this was hard, dangerous work. We were doing some research on this. When you look at some of these salvage companies, there was another one. It wasn't this particular one. There's a photo on the internet, and I'm going to see if it's public domain, we'll get it into our pictures as well. It's a whole crew of guys, and they're in front of a building. No, they are from this company. They're from Merritt and Chapman. Mm-hmm. And then there's another picture of the headquarters of one of these salvage companies, and it's the front of their warehouse, and it's the nameplates from all the ships they salvage, the whole front of it. Yeah. It's just wild. Or you think about that. Derelict vessels. And so the other thing about this, I don't want to get into this here because this would take a lot of research that we didn't do for this episode, but marine salvage law is very complicated. And there's certain codes that are associated with it that people just sort of know, but it varies from country to country. And if you're in international waters, and the first code is that you have to give aid. If somebody needs aid, you have to get it. It's like the ships that heard the Titanic they're supposed to go to the Titanic. That's the case. If somebody's in distress, you go and you have to give aid. So in the process of giving this aid, you're entitled to some type of compensation. And in the case of a ship that needs to be salvaged, that's generally might be the ship itself or its contents, especially if you're saving the lives of the people on it. So there's rules, and they've evolved over the years. We've been at sea a long time. So they get updated. I think there was a big update in 1989. I can't remember what the last one was. But the long and short of it is you go to the vessel ostensibly to see if there's anyone there that needs saving. That would be the first job of Captain Carlson here. Get on board. Are there people in distress? Does anyone need help? Once there's nobody in distress, and it's also obvious what the situation is with the boat, you can pull the boat out. And I'm pretty sure if you do, you get to keep it or all of its contents, unless somebody buys you, or you're entitled to get paid or compensated for it. Like the Deering Company could pay him if he brought it back to them, but it was unsalvageable. So his crew went about salvaging what they could from it. They took down a few sails and some other things, but there wasn't a whole lot to take off of it because, first of all, it was empty.
Right.
So it was not like there was a cargo you could offload, which you wouldn't be able to do at a shoal anyway, I don't believe. But secondly, there just wasn't a whole lot left on it. I actually wanted to read this excerpt from Professor Simpson's book. This is from the bottom of page 23. From the Deering that Friday, all that rescue's men salvaged were 1 foresail, 1 mizzen sail, 2 jibs, an American flag, a Union Jack, 22 code flags, 3 cabin chairs, a lounge, 2 side lights, 2 riding lights, 1 red light, and 1 bell. Foreman Samuelson picked up Captain Wormel's Bible, which, by the way, he did not take with him if they found it on the ship, and carried it to Carlson, who would then send it to the captain's family. The other thing they found, 3 starving cats.
Ah, yes.
Now, what I wouldn't give to know what these cats, they know what happened. They know everything.
Hey,
they were there.
Yeah, but they're too busy staring at ghosts in the corner. You know.
Well, can you imagine? Like, imagine that ship with nobody on it, just sailing towards the North Carolina coast at God knows, how many knots, and then slamming into this shoal, and these 3 cats being on there with no food. And I guess the cats didn't find the spare ribs in the kitchen.
Well, there you go.
Because you think they would have gotten to that, but they may have been down in the holds. This is a very, 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 very big boat, know, and traditionally you have cats to kill rats on boats like that.
Yeah.
But everyone who is all the cat lovers out there will be pleased to know that Captain Carlson adopted them, and they went to live on the rescue on the wrecker. So
there you go. Yeah.
You can always use a cat at sea.
Yeah, at least 1 mewling gray kitty was found in the galley, I think. So, which is also odd, that they wouldn't get to the ribs.
Yeah, they didn't. So one of them, you read that one was found in the galley. See, I didn't read where they were. So
well, that's that's one differing account.
Maybe it was too weak to jump up on the counter.
No, I think a cat. Cat. Listen, just run the can opener; they'll come running.
Well, so listen to this though. So there was a final sale, and this I want to read this too, just because I thought this was really interesting. Everything Carlson and the rescue wreckers had left aboard the Deering, and that the local boys from Hatteras Island had subsequently retrieved, now went on public sale at Hatteras Village under the authority of W.L. Gaskell, the wreck commissioner. First went the food, small quantities of beef, pork, ham, and bacon, of coffee and curry, peas, beans, pepper, and salmon, of mustard, yeast, hops, tapioca, grits, pumpkins, tomatoes, peppers, molasses, mutton, milk, prunes, and lard. Most of it sold for anywhere from a nickel to 90 cents, though the ship's sugar brought $3, her flour $5.50. The buyers, all of them living between Buxton and Ocracoke, which is right there, paid $44.05 for the Deering's groceries. Furnishings out here at the edge of the sea were harder to come by than food, and these the bidding public valued much more highly. A table sold for $12, a chiffonier for $13.50, a set of chairs for $14.50, and a bedstead for $22.50. Lanterns went for 2 bits, though lamps got as high as $2.25. 8 mattresses were brought forth. Just what you want, a mattress off of a ship. Annie Austin made off with 2 for $1.75, but Irish Willis paid $12 for his. Brooms, buckets, doors, tables, pillows, blankets, linoleum, hoses, boxes, twine, everything must go. More than one of the 6 single-space legal pages listing the Deering's items was devoted to rope. There's a ton of rope, what sailing vessels have.
Lines.
C.B. Foster paid $19 for his rope, but Commissioner Gaskell only paid a dime for his. But, he's the guy running it, so he's got an inside line there. Irving Stowe bought some nautical charts for $0.25, I bet you get a fortune for those on eBay today. The nautical charts from the Deering?
Certainly they might be accursed items, but
Yeah.
but it would be cool to have a little end table from the Deer, wouldn't it? From the Deering?
Yeah, no, I mean, how cool. J.C. Gaskell of the Creeds Hill Coast Guard Station got the captain's trunk, which I guess is a different one from the one that wasn't there, for $5. And A.J. Gray got his desk for $35.
Yeah.
Imagine the desk.
Well, that's a lot of money back then, so I don't know. You don't have to get your old-timey calculator, but I would guess a couple of $100.
Well, it's right here. So listen to this. All right, so the wrecked ship was sold to Lee Robinson for $25.
Well,
now, I can't figure that out. If I can't figure out, A, why it's so cheap, but B, also why it's worth anything, because it's stuck. It's not going anywhere. So I don't know how that works.
That might be a legal thing involving title, or is there something
just to kind of retire it or something.
Yeah, there's like when you buy somebody's house for $1 and then
well, if somebody knows nautical or maritime history and you know why you would buy a derelict ship that you're never going to be able to get to, let me know. The total for material and food taking off the ship came to $841.75, less the wreck commissioner's 5%, less the cost of a watchman and advertising, $25.67, and less than the salvers, 60%. So the law at this time must be, just so you know, to what we were saying earlier, the salvagers, they were entitled to 60% of whatever could be salvaged from the ship in exchange for attempting to salvage it. That left a balance of $309.60. Commissioner Gaskill added in the vendue value of the wreck, again less his 5%. So to the faraway owners of the latest Outer Banks shipwreck, and by the way, I read this in the book, we didn't talk about it, but people had shares in this. It was too expensive for any one person to back. Some people had more shares than others, but even those folks only had 1 or 2 shares. Yeah. And I think each share on this, don't quote me on this, I can't remember, it's somewhere in Professor Bland's book, but I think the shares were like $2,750 a piece, or maybe $3,750, I can't remember. So you had to have a good chunk of change to invest in something like this.
Well, it's always been risky, but people have done that since the beginning of time. Well, the beginning of commercial seafaring trade. And
this is venture capital.
You can make a lot of money, but your ships can also sink. And think about how much Spanish treasure was lost off the coast of Florida and the eastern United States on their way through to bad storms that they're still trying to dig up. That kind of gambling or venture or speculation has made people very rich and very poor, bankrupting them if your ship does not come in. And that's the expression, your ship has finally come in. So
that's what Richard Branson says. The difference between billionaires and millionaires is that millionaires started airlines.
Yeah. Back in regards to the cat, it's a little like Jonesy the cat from the movie Alien. And I managed now to work in aliens into the scenario. In a roundabout way.
So you had to. You worked it out.
Yeah. So if Jonesy could talk, it's like, there's some giant monster that, oozes goo and killed everybody.
Yeah.
Except for Sigourney Weaver.
I just want to read these last 2 sentences on page 29 of Bland Simpson's book, and you can see why he's a creative writing professor. Such a great book. This book reads so well. He says, to the faraway owners of the latest Outer Banks shipwreck, now relieved of their loss and burden, Commissioner Gaskill, after the late February vendue, turned over the paltry sum of $333.35. So all those people that had shares in the boat, they had to split that up.
Yeah.
Then he writes, the schooner Carroll A. Deering herself, the ship that had cost $250,000 to build, stood 3 weeks pounding on the world's worst shoals, then came apart. And that's something to talk about what happened to the ship afterwards. They couldn't pull it out of there, and it continued to get bad. I think it got battered by at least one more storm. I'm not sure, but ultimately it disintegrated. There was another vessel that came across a huge, like a 75-foot piece of it way out at sea, and they marked it where they had found it. And that piece they wound up destroying with gun cotton bombs, just some kind of like thermite thing. I'm not even sure. I don't know a lot about explosives.
Well, let's look at
that's what they used to blow that up.
Nitrocellulose. Well, the idea here is that, gun cotton, flash string. If you've ever seen magicians when they do the little trick where they can light that on fire and it just completely goes up.
Flash paper.
Yeah, flash paper. It's a mixture of nitric acid and sulfuric acid.
There you go.
And that's just what you use to nitrate cellulose. Highly flammable. Right. It was also used to replace gunpowder as a low-order explosive in mining and other applications. So, the idea is that it's a propellant and an explosive and was used to basically destroy the ship. Now, here's another point of contention. There's some accounts that say that the ship was not blown up. Some say it was. I think in most, the overriding narrative is that dynamite was used, or again, cotton, to destroy the ship because it was deemed a nautical
navigation hazard.
Yeah, and that it's going to get other ships in trouble and damage them. There is at least one account that says that, and Nate will say it's the more dramatic one, as he does in his article, that they gave the order to go out and blow it up, but a sudden and mysterious squall spewed up, preventing the ship from being blown up. Like it was a preventative measure from some unseen force. Well, I'm going, that's a little bit much, but basically they went to go try to blow it up and they couldn't, so they just kind of left the weather to batter it up into pieces.
Well, my question about that is, and this is the thing, the piece that Simpson writes about, that's just one piece of it. That's only 75 feet. It was 250 feet. There was a good chunk of it that was left on the shoal until it broke free and came ashore.
Right.
And so that piece, and there's pictures of that sitting on the beach. So that's different from the piece that got blown up in the ocean. But supposedly the piece on the beach was eventually destroyed as well because it also became a navigation hazard, maybe due to tide or whatever. It got out, the shoreline shifted and it was a danger maybe to locals because it was up on the beach. I don't know. But that could have also been what they went to go blow up when they destroyed it. Because at some point it said it was completely destroyed, what was left on the beach. There are parts of it, though, in a museum at Hatteras. The ship's bell is there. And I know there's a picture online of one of the captains that you would wrap the, ropes around. Huge, by the way.
Yeah.
Some of the details are murky.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the journey. What happened? How did the Carroll A. Deering arrive on the Outer Diamond Shoal? Where was it leading up to this? And why was the captain who was on it on it? So it starts out being loaded with coal on August 26th, 1920, exactly 49 years to the day before yours truly was born. That's when this went down. It then sailed from Hampton Roads, Virginia, which is around the area of Virginia Beach and Norfolk and that general area, and loaded with this coal, which is ostensibly, I think, I didn't read this, but it's probably from Pennsylvania. That was what it was built to handle, or it was purpose-built to carry coal from Pennsylvania to other parts of the world. And it sailed up north to Delaware. And at some point while it was there, Captain Merritt, who was the regular captain for her, fell ill, and he didn't want to go to sea. And then on top of that, he did not like the crew. And this is very important. The crew that he was supposed to go out with, he was particularly worried about the first mate, but also some of the other crew members. And the only person that he really trusted was the engineer, a guy named Herbert Bates, who he had sailed with before, and a lot of his friends had sailed with before. Right. So Captain Merritt calls on another friend of his, a neighbor of his from Portland, Maine, which, by the way, pretty much everybody that lived in Maine was a captain at this point in time.
That's where they go to hang out
and
they
all knew each other, yeah. And so he calls this other captain, Willis B. Wormell, Wormell, a friend of his, and he's like, I need you to go and take the Deering from Delaware down to Rio de Janeiro with its load of coal for me. Wormell had been retired. He was 66 years old, and he had been off the sea for, I think, several months, not a super long time, but he'd been off the sea, and I think his family was probably glad to have him around. He had survived a long career at sea, but he came out of retirement as a standby captain to take this trip, a sort of on-call guy. Merritt told Wormell he didn't trust the crew, and he was particularly, again, worried about everyone but the engineer, and specifically the first mate. So Wormell takes the job. He gets on the boat. They sail toward their destination of Rio on December 2nd, 1920. So it's near the end of the year in 1920. Make it there. They offload the coal probably around Christmas time. And in January of 1921, they start heading back toward Hampton Roads, or home. Along the way, on January 9th, they stop in Barbados, Bridgetown. And during this time, there was a blow-up between first mate Charles McClellan, a Scotsman, and by all accounts, apparently quite a heavy drinker, and Captain Wormell. And at some point, there was a fight, and McClellan threatened Captain Wormell and tells him, I'll kill you before it's over, old man.
I'll kill you, I will. You have to put the I will.
I can't. Yeah, old time, I'll kill you. And that fight took place on the boat, apparently. So Wormell kicks him off the boat, and he leaves the boat, but the whole crew goes with him, which gives you a little bit, starting to smell a little bit like a potential mutiny here. The crew goes with McClellan into town and they start a 5-day bender, just like a hardcore, just drinking and carousing and doing whatever they're going to do there. And at some point, this culminates in McClellan getting arrested and thrown in jail. So during these 5 days, Wormel, I guess, is talking to other friends of his. There's a lot of captains down there that are people that he knows again from Maine. Captain Norton from the Augusta W. Snow. He had told him that McClellan was habitually drunk and horrible to the rest of the crew. As first mate, he would be in charge of everybody else. And just saying that he was an over-disciplinarian and just generally a mean person. Later, Captain Norton sees McClellan himself. And McClellan comes up to him and says, my crew is lazy, and whenever I go to discipline them, Wormel won't let me.
Right.
And then he asks Norton for a job. And Norton is like, hell no, and puts him in his place. You're not coming to work for me. Yeah. And then he said that McClellan said to him, well, then I'll get the captain before we get to Norfolk, I will.
Yeah.
See, there's your I will.
That's what I was referencing. There is some indication in the later investigations after this all kind of cleared up that Captain Merritt himself may have used or feigned a severe illness to get out of captaining that ship and taking his son with him, because his son was his first mate on that voyage as well. So it's like, I'm too sick for this. I'm going to get off. And then that's a good excuse to get somebody else aboard, because he didn't get a good vibe from the crew.
Yeah, maybe he was trusting his gut.
Yeah, right. Could be. Or he was just genuinely ill, but they put off in Delaware, I think, to recover. And then he's out of this mess.
Yeah.
Smart move on his part, sickness or no.
Yeah.
And again, he's able to get his son off with a good excuse. And so they leave. But yeah, there's just a bad ill will feeling all around with this crew particularly. And with that captain and the next, from the accounts, I get the impression that they weren't totally incompetent, but just maybe dysfunctional. No one's getting along. It's not a happy crew.
Right. Yeah.
For a big ship, there's only 10 of them. So, you have to get along. Not a good working environment, which then starts to point more heavily towards one explanation over others.
So that lends a lot of credence to the idea possibly of some kind of mutiny. And Captain Wormel also met with another captain, G.W. Bunker, also from Maine, and they went for a walk on the beach in Barbados. And Captain Bunker asks Wormel, he's like, do you think the crew is going to turn on you? And Wormel said he wasn't sure. Yeah. And I guess Bunkers might have said to him, I mean, and this is according to Bland Simpson. And like I said, some of the book is historical fiction, right. So it's hard to know how many of these conversations are super accurate. But I think a lot of them are based on accounts that were told in other places later. But one thing is true. It's possible that Bunker may have mentioned a recent mutiny that took place. And he might have said to Wormel, a mutiny only takes a few, especially armed, not everyone. And he mentioned a ship that was mutinied by just one crew member and 2 stowaways, the Senator Schroeder, and that's Schroder. It was a German ship. So I went to look that up. That was commandeered by Hermann Neufken, who was a German sailor and militant communist. He was active in the early 20th century. In the 1910s, Neufken had become involved with the communist movement and worked to organize labor unions and revolutionary activity among sailors and dock workers. He is remembered as a prominent figure in the communist movement among German sailors and dock workers in the early 20th century. While not a household name, Neufken's memoirs and legacy contribute to the understanding of communist agitation and labor activism within the German merchant marine industry in the early 20th century. That tells you a little bit about him. So in 1921, this is from Wikipedia, this portion here, he hijacked the ship Senator Schroeder to transport Franz Jung, Claire Jung, and Jan Appel to the Second World Congress of the Communist International in Moscow. So I guess he was on that ship and he took it over with just a couple of people and made them take him to Russia so he could go to this communist meeting.
Yeah, I mean, it only takes one person to hijack a plane with a weapon.
Right. That was only 5 months before all of this was going down. So that was still probably pretty fresh in all of these captains' minds. You know, they were all thinking like, what can happen? I'm stuck on this boat with these people I don't really know that well.
Yeah.
So Wormel speculates with all of his friends. They're all captains. They're all a little worried about his situation. But he probably also wonders, like, what are mutineers going to do with an empty ship? The Deering was unladen.
Yeah.
You know, the coal was offloaded. I mean, it's a valuable boat, but it's going to be a hard thing to hide and use if you steal it.
Well, that's the other thing is that it also sticks out, as the accounts say. It's a 5-masted grand schooner that's basically it sticks out like a sore thumb. So maybe also not good for smuggling.
Right.
Unless that was your cover. You know, it's like, oh, it's a holiday ship for tourists. It's a pleasure craft now. And that's really what you're doing to draw attention away from it. But if it's not, it doesn't go that fast either. So you'd be much better off stealing a steamer that looked like a lot of other steamers out on the seas than this thing.
Well, and here's an interesting afternote. So on January 16th, Captain Norton, who had talked to Wormel and warned him about this, saw a 5-masted schooner about 5 miles away from him that was clearly drifting and rotating out of control at sea. And he couldn't, from the distance he was seeing it, he couldn't tell if it was the Deering, but he knew that something was wrong on that vessel. So that's interesting. That's on January 16th. However, the Deering made progress after that point. 2 days later, she was off Cape Canaveral. 2 days after that, Beaufort, South Carolina. January 23rd, 1921, she passed the Frying Pan light vessel off Cape Fear in Sea. That's just south of Wilmington, where the Cape Fear River comes out into the Atlantic Ocean. A light vessel is a pre-lighthouse where you have a boat out in the water with lights on it to warn passing ships.
A light high up on its mast. At first reading, you would think that, oh, maybe it's just it's made out of balsa wood. It's a very light ship. No, it's a ship with a light on it.
And, it's not that.
No, but it's often used in
fact, they're usually steel, in fact.
They're sturdy because they have to be out there in bad weather as well and stalwart.
And anchored.
To provide a beacon to ships, and also in places where it's not practical or too deep to build a lighthouse.
Exactly.
For one reason or another, you can't build a lighthouse, but you need some kind of warning, so you have a light ship. I was going to also say about the ships that were the wreckers or bankers, they were called sometimes, that would salvage these ships. Sometimes they were not run by the most scrupulous people, and what they would do is put a false lantern out on the shore of a rocky point, trying to get ships to like, oh, it's safe. Yeah, let's go in there. And then they would purposely ground them and then go basically loot them. So that happened quite a bit, but not as much, I think, in the first part of the 20th century. That and piracy were things that were seeming to be going away. You know, also there's a Coast Guard station nearby. So you want to give around.
That's right.
You don't want to get away with too much shenanigans.
No, this isn't a smart place to FAFO, as they say.
Yeah.
Because the Coast Guard is everywhere. The whole coastline is watched.
Yeah, exactly. It's watched, but that did happen. Or they would place the light around a horse, I think, and kind of march him up and down the beach, or just let it go. And and then a ship's pilot would think it was safe there, and then run around on a shoal or a rocky outcropping, and then basically you have a lot of sellable stuff on board. In this case, not that much sellable stuff, so that also doesn't figure in completely. But then you wonder if people who are going to do that actually know what's on board.
Well, on January 29th, 1921, after a bad storm, one of the most significant final sightings of the Carroll A. Deering happened. The Lookout Shoals light vessel off of Cape Lookout NC, just 70 miles southwest of Cape Hatteras in the Diamond Shoals, was at sea, and there had been a storm, but it had abated, and around 4 p.m., the Deering sailed past the Lookout Shoals light vessel at about 4 knots. It was a beautiful day at sea that day, and the light vessel even got a picture of her passing. It's possibly the last picture of the Deering at sea. You can find it on the internet and hopefully on our webpage. Deering, however, had no wireless radio, but it was close enough for someone on the deck to yell to someone on the light vessel. Whoever that person was, they yelled through a megaphone, quote, "We've lost both anchors and chains in the gale off Frying Pan Shoals. Forward word to our owners," end quote. But even though the lightship's master thought that the sails looked neatly trimmed and that the ship was making good headway, he also noticed that things didn't look right on board the Deering. He said the crew was all over the decks. They were scattered around like no one was in charge, and more specifically, they were on the quarterdeck. The quarterdeck is a sacred space for the captain on all ships. I'll give you some more information about this. It's where all the scenes with the captains take place in every pirate movie you've ever seen. It's the ceremonial command center of the ship. It's for the captain and senior officers only. Meetings, discussions about navigation and decisions. the most prestigious location on the ship and a symbol of authority and the hierarchy and rules of access, and it was raised up to denote its importance. Also, anybody that's watched Star Trek knows about the meetings in the quarterdeck. So why then were regular crew members up there when it sailed past the lightship and there was no captain to be seen? So where was the captain? Was he below deck? Was he dead? Was he floating far away in the ocean? We don't know.
Okay, so we've established that as it was observed, the crew members are running around in a disorderly fashion, not like they were regularly working or supposed to, as from the eye of a captain peering over at it, that it seemed to be guys running around in disarray. They, as you said, they're up on the quarterdeck, which is the raised kind of portion where only the captain is. So that's a no-no. So that would let you know that the captain's not around or he's down below, tied up. Who knows? They are kind of running amok a little bit, but not running around with their hair on fire, just like not something ain't right about the way they're moving. Yeah. And so, because a ship has very limited real estate, you have to move in an orderly fashion or do your work in an orderly fashion. And so that becomes very routine and noticeable by people who've worked on ships for years and years. But this is a bit of a clue, as you said. So somebody was reported to have yelled through a megaphone from the Deering, the Carroll Deering, stating, as you said, we've lost 2 anchors, send word to the Deering Company, let them know. And it was reported that there are some reports that the man described was tall, thin, with red hair, and spoke with a Scandinavian accent.
Yeah.
There were certainly some Scandinavian people on board. That would make sense. But that's who it was described, but it was unknown from that description exactly what crew member that was, as far as I know.
Yeah, we have Willis B. Wormel, the master, Charles McClellan, the mate, doesn't say where he's from, Johan Fredrickson, bosun, James A. Benjamin, stew, Hilbert Pillsbury Bates, engineer, that's the one they trusted, Niels P. Nielsen, Niel, able-bodied seaman, Niels M. Olesen, able-bodied seaman, Christian Peterson, able-bodied seaman, Peter Sorensen. So I would say Nielsen, Olsen, Peterson, and Sorensen. That's 1, 2, 3, 4 guys. They're definitely Scandinavian. But McClellan, Charles McClellan, the first mate, is the one that was so rowdy and apparently drinking all the time.
Right.
He was arguing to the other captain about not being able to discipline the crew the way he wanted to. But then Captain Wormel was like, he's trying to discipline them too much. So they disagreed on that. But then also when Wormel kicked McClellan off the boat for threatening him, a lot of the crew went with him.
Right.
Why would a crew that's being abused by McClellan? It just sounds like there was some very complex dynamics going on there between all these guys.
Exactly. And so imagine being an outsider here. Well, in this case, it's the captain of the lightship, James Steele. And he's the one who spotted or had the report of a tall, thin, red-haired man. Also, the red-haired man did not seem to be like an officer, did not act like an officer. So somebody on the lower crew level, which again, why are they making that announcement? Why is it the captain or the first mate if they're still around? So he found that to be odd. And then, as you said, also the report of losing the 2 anchors. If you are trying to get away, why would that be your message? So just kind of odd and doesn't add up unless there's something else going on. Okay, so at least that message gets relayed to Captain Steele, except their radio is also on the blink, not working. They can't report that message, and they're hoping that another passing ship will be able to relay it for them. Because again, that's maritime law. You have to communicate. It's very dangerous out there. People's lives could be lost, plus a lot of money and ships. So the thing is, like, let's all help each other out as much as possible. That's a mandate. However, when a ship does come close, a steamship, and this is shortly after they start going south, they pass this other ship. Well, Captain Steele has them put up a signal flags. You've probably seen it before. Semaphore, I think, is the name of the process. And so the flags RQK, that signifies have important message. So stop, pay attention, listen to what we got to say, please relay this. Well, here's the weird thing. This steamship did not come any closer. So the lightship, captained by James Steele, they blasted their steam whistle 4 times. Now, this is so powerful that you can hear this horn 5 miles away. And it means, hey, pay attention, please come over here. Got something aboard to relay. Well, at this, the steamer changes course and steers away from them, accelerates. And here's the odd kicker. As Captain Steele is looking at them, obviously through binoculars or a telescope or a spyglass, the crew drops a canvas over the stern, I think on the transom, to cover up the name of the ship so he can't see it.
Yeah.
So there's some shenanigans going on there.
This reminds me of that time I was riding on the back of my friend's motorcycle and he was speeding down this street.
Oh, dear.
And we went past a police car and he made me cover up the license plate with my hands.
With your hands. Okay. Now, did it work?
We got away. Yeah.
Anywho, back onto this steamer, the Hewitt, because this is another strange other ship tale, right?
Yes.
So in the middle of all of this, there's a steamship named the SS, or SS standing for steamship, or single screw ship, single propeller ship, called the Hewitt. And that also vanished, also without a trace.
A lot of people had seen it. It had made its way past certain points into the ports it was supposed to go to, but then it just didn't show up. And this coincides with February 1st, 1921. Coast Guardsmen and other eyewitnesses on the shore saw a flash of light at sea and heard an explosion after that. Question is, could that have been the Hewitt? But nobody knows. Right. Nobody knows what it was. And they went out and they looked for wreckage and they couldn't find a thing. But there was definitely an explosion. Maybe it was a UAP.
Possibly, because it reminds me, speaking of that, it reminds me a little about Flight 19 and the Martin Marauder aircraft that went after them and was also missing. And the only thing found there...
the flying gas can, they called it.
Right, and it was an oil slick. There was another ship that reported a flash of light, perhaps, and some smoke, but they pulled up and could not find anything. That's also, I would say, fairly common, but that does happen where another ship that's connected to it also goes missing in a mysterious way. That steamship, though, was that known to be an oiler, meaning it was a fuel ship, a refueling ship?
The Hewitt?
Yes.
I can't remember. I think it might have been. I'm
okay.
Not sure
I think one of them prominently was.
There's a lot of details on it in
that would explain the explosion in my mind.
Yeah, exactly.
And the lots of smoke being seen.
That's
something
true.
can go wrong. These things, as we said before, a lot of the crashes and tragedies that happen off the coast are not just from weather, but also explosions, fire, all these other things that can go wrong with the steamship or just any ship. So that's another odd thing, though, that also goes missing. And later on, as we'll visit here, that happens to be one of the reasons that the government and Secretary of Commerce at the time, Herbert Hoover, later President Hoover, would take an interest in investigating this because so many ships in this area seem to go missing.
Yeah.
It was a bit of a pet project for some of these people. Like, what's going on here? Before really talk of the Bermuda Triangle is happening. Although I must say, before we forget, this is mentioned, this case, in Charles Fort's book, Low.
That's right.
So he thought it was odd enough to add to his collection there. I tripped onto the Y-Files a long time ago and it became one of my favorite YouTube channels because the research is solid but not overwhelming. We're interested in the same topics, the visuals are enticing, and I like the interplay between host AJ and his wisecracking sidekick Hecklefish. And I gotta admit it, sometimes I wish we'd cover a subject as well as they did. And now the Y-Files podcast is just as terrific.
Yeah, you know what? I love the Y-Files too, and I've often thought, could I replace you with Hecklefish? I've tried. I guess he's got a non-compete. He won't come over. So.
Well, I'd go with that. I'll give Hecklefish first right of refusal.
Okay, noted. Well, they do have very high production value on the Y-Files. And if you haven't heard of the Y-Files yet, like many podcasts, the Y-Files covers conspiracies, aliens, time travel, and ancient civilizations.
Yeah, and covers them well. But listen to what AJ has to say about his show, The Y-Files. Some people are very serious about this stuff. They believe every detail, even if the details don't quite add up. Others tear the stories apart. But, what fun is that? The Y-Files is different.
Indeed it is. And he goes on to say, first we explore the mystery, then together we separate fact from fiction and see what's left. Some legends can't be debunked, and those are my favorites.
Sounds like a case of like minds here. Well, check it out, folks, because it's good. The Y-Files is available on Spotify or anywhere you get your podcasts.
The X-Files said the truth is out there, but the Y-Files says the truth is right here.
Tell me how old you are without really telling me how old you are.
I saw the first Star Wars in the theater 9 times.
Wow, really?
It was the Cooper Theater on Colorado Boulevard in Denver, which was a Cinerama theater. It was life-changing. And I guess they tore that theater down in 1994, but that whole experience has lived rent-free in my head ever since I was 8.
Nice. Well, I remember seeing it at the Fox Theater, and I think there was a line around the building. They didn't have multiplexes back then. It was a single screen before they turned it into a multiplex. So it was the only thing showing, and I loved it so much. I invited like 2 good friends from school, and then I realized later I proceeded to just tell them the whole plot while the movie was playing.
Yeah, I love it. I don't think I can ever convey how much my mind melted when the first TIE fighters and X-Wings blasted onto the screen, from like they were coming from over your shoulder. I mean, the sound design was unreal, and they just looked absolutely amazing. All I wanted to do was pilot one.
Yeah, you and every other kid alive in 1977. And I remember being distinctly upset that Annie Hall won Best Picture that year because I thought Star Wars would win. Yeah.
That's right. And that's an excellent film, though, I have to say.
Oh, it is,
well,
too. Yes.
If you've ever wondered who came up with those incredible spaceship designs from Star Wars, let us introduce you to Colin Cantwell, the genius behind the X-Wing, the TIE Fighter, the first design for the Millennium Falcon, and so many other iconic ships. And I say the first design because they wound up going with the design you know so well now, but the first one basically became what the Princess's ship was. It was very similar to that. And by the way, the only reason there was a trench on the Death Star was because when Colin Cantwell ordered the styrene globe to build it, it came in 2 halves. And when he realized it would be difficult to make that trench go away, he pitched a dramatic fight scene in it to George Lucas, and he went for it.
Oh, my goodness. That is so essential and iconic.
Yeah.
It was just kind of an accident. But didn't he work on 2001 also?
Yes, he did. And he's actually the one who suggested to Kubrick that they use Strauss's Also Sprach Zarathustra for the opening music. And he managed the completion of the animation at the end. I mean, the guy was a legend. And that's not all, by the way. His history is unbelievable. But a few years ago, I stumbled across ColinCantwell.com, and I managed to get my very own signed photo of a model he built called Luke Skywalker's Skyhopper. That model actually became the inspiration for the Imperial Shuttle, but it's one of my favorite pieces of art that I own.
That is fabulous. Well, Colin has passed away, but there are still nearly 24 exclusive prints of his amazing work available for purchase. Head on over to ColinCantwell.com and use the promo code DROID, D-R-O-I-D. And here's why it's so special. Each purchase helps support the TSJ Foundation's mission to inspire youth in STEAM fields, and that's science, technology, engineering, arts, and math.
These are stunning prints of his original models that you can get at his website, from the Death Star to the Star Destroyer to the X-Wing and TIE Fighter, all right there.
Yeah, it's a win-win. You get a piece of cinematic history, and your purchase helps build museum exhibits and fun classes that get young people excited about careers in these fields.
Oh, and don't forget to use the promo code DROID for a sweet 15% holiday discount. Just make sure you grab yours before the offer ends on December 15th, 2024.
Whether you're a longtime fan of his work or just discovering Colin's brilliance, these prints are a perfect way to connect with an incredible legacy.
So what are you waiting for? Visit ColinCantwell.com today and use the code DROID to get those prints and be a part of inspiring the next generation of innovators.
Help the TSJ Foundation support STEAM fields today.
I'm Kristar Marie, and when I'm not knitting sweaters for cryptoids, aliens, and monsters, I'm listening to Astonishing Legends. Let's get back to the show.
Well, on January 30th, this would be the last sighting of the Deering underway. The SS Lake Elon sees her around 3:30 p.m., about 25 miles southwest of the Diamond Shoals light vessel, which would not be far from where it would be found. I actually want to read, this is a letter from the master of the Lake Elon. This is on page 66 of Simpson's book. The wind was southwest moderate, and she had all sails set and steering about north-northwest, making about 7 miles. We passed her about 5:45 p.m., about 1/2 mile off on our port side we were, then about 25 miles southwest, true, from the Diamond Shoal light vessel. From the description of the Deering, we think that this schooner was her, but we could not read her name. There was nothing irregular to be seen on board this vessel, but she was steering a peculiar course. She appeared to be steering for Cape Hatteras, which is, folks, where she wound up. The Diamond Shoal is right off Cape Hatteras. We sighted Diamond Shoal light vessel about 7 p.m. and passed it at 8:32 p.m. The lookout on the schooner should have sighted Cape Hatteras light, also the light ship at Diamond Shoal, a little later than we did, but in plenty of time to avoid going on shore as the weather was clear and cloudy with good visibility. There were a couple of more ships in the vicinity steering a course parallel with us, which should have convinced the captain of the schooner that he was steering a wrong course. Hoping that this may be of some value, we are very truly yours, Henry Johnson, Master SS Lake Elon, E.V. Ferrandini, Chief Officer. So what's interesting about that is it seems like at this point, this is the day after it passed the Lookout Shoals light vessel and said they lost both their anchors. So people were on the ship at that point.
Yeah.
Whether it was the captain or not, there were human beings,
Yes.
and they seemed to be controlling it, no matter how disciplined they were or not. The next day, it's sighted from several miles away by the SS Lake Elon. And by that captain's account, it's headed straight for the shoals.
Yeah.
It's underway straight for the shoals. And there's enough evidence that it should have seen the lightship at Diamond Shoals or the lighthouse at Hatteras or all the other vessels not going that way.
Right.
And a good captain, which Wormel was a super experienced captain, an expert in all of these waters, would have said, oh, oops, we're not doing the right thing here.
Yeah.
And so theoretically would have any decent navigator or junior officer or even other crew member might have been like, this isn't right. So there's some question, I think, at this point, this January 30th sighting that the Lake Elon is seeing, if anyone was on board at that point.
Yeah.
If they had already set the sails and maybe somehow tried to lock the rudder or just get it pointed toward the shoal, and they had already gotten off the ship, everybody, for whatever reason and in whatever way.
Yeah, to scuttle it or to kind of ground it. But also, as you were saying, and I think this happens to be the case with the Elon, is that they were able to see the Deering through binoculars or telescope and saw no one on the upper decks, which was odd, but they ignored it thinking like, yeah, they've got to have seen this. They're going to get warned. Don't worry about it. And so they ignored it.
Yeah, well, you wouldn't have any reason to think, I mean, you might be like, oh, well, that's a weird course, but if the sails are all unfurled and it looks more or less under control, you're not going to be like, oh, no one's on that.
Right.
That's not your thought. Yeah. So no matter what the circumstances are. So it's highly unusual. So that's the last time it's seen. The next time it is discovered is by C.P. Brady through his telescope in the morning on the day that we started this whole story. So now we come down to the question, we've gotten to the point where this ship has crashed. The real question is, what happened? And unlike a lot of ships, ships that are lost at sea or disappeared, you don't know anything. They go out and you don't even figure out they're missing for weeks and weeks. You don't know anything could have happened in a long span of time leading up to their disappearance. But in this case, it's really only one day since it had people on it.
Mm-hmm.
It's one day. So what do we know? We know that McClellan couldn't stand Wormel, and Wormel was leery of McClellan. So they were butting heads already. Is there going to be a mutiny? McClellan was kicked off the ship by Wormel in Barbados, and then a bunch of the crew went with him on a 5-day bender. So who knows what happens there? McClellan goes to jail. Wormel bails him out, which is interesting. It's like, hey, look, I hope you slept it off. Let's get out of here. We got work to do. We need to get this ship back. They get back on the boat, and along the way, something goes bad. Now, this isn't indicated in Simpson's book, so I don't know for sure, but I believe that there would be no alcohol on board. This was during Prohibition, which we're going to talk a little bit more about in a minute. But even if it weren't, I'm pretty sure that you can't have alcohol on board of a merchant marine ship at all, period. Maybe the captain has some hidden away, but I don't think you're allowed to have it. So I don't think there's a circumstance where, in theory, McClellan would be allowed to get sauced and then go crazy on the ship. Although, who knows? Big boat, he could have hidden some on there and brought it back.
True. But yeah, just not the best working conditions, unless you're in the British Navy in centuries past, where that was the only thing to look forward to. Also was the only good drinking water is some grog or rum. And as the old saying goes, the British Navy ran on rum and butter. In this case, though, especially with guys that are, as McClellan is described as, he's an alcoholic. And so that's not, and was constantly drunk, I think even sometimes on duty. I think you're right here. There may not have been any on board because it's just kind of hard to do your job if that's all there's to look forward to and the only recreation. after this, the next thing that we know that happens is this ship crashes on the shoals. It gets run aground and it's stuck there, and no one except for a couple of kiddies are on board. Well, now the investigation begins. And so it is kind of a thorough investigation. There's certainly a lot of people that have joined in. You have the Coast Guard, you have other officials, you have the U.S. government eventually, the Maritime Merchant Association, and they're all conducting an investigation, also very much motivated by Captain Worrell's daughter, Lulu Worrell.
Right.
She pressured a lot of people because her thing was, look, if they had gotten off for legitimate reasons, there was a problem on board and they made it to shore, I know that my dad would have eventually sent word to us and tried to get home, or at least got a message to us that he was okay. This is very much not like him. Something bad happened and possibly something criminal happened. So she was applying a lot of pressure for an investigation to happen, but they were investigating anyway. And during this, something else odd happens. A piece of evidence literally washes ashore. And what is that? It's a message in a bottle.
Yeah, and this at first seems like something pretty compelling.
Well, if you look at the clues when you first read it, it is.
Yeah.
So tell us about that. This and I love this name. Who's the guy that discovered it?
Christopher Columbus Gray.
Yes.
Is the guy that found it. And now this is an interesting character. This is a guy that lived, down there at the coast. One of the quotes in Simpson's book is that the guy that he was referred to as wild as a deer. Now, I don't know if Simpson, that's part of his historical fiction there, but it's funny because they basically were indicating whenever they went to talk to him about his find or ask him more questions about it, if he didn't want to see you, he just kind of disappeared into the woods and you would never find him.
Right, yeah.
But he did say that he found this bottle and that there was a piece of paper in it.
Which he immediately gives to the Coast Guard for examination and evidence.
Yes.
And a couple of interesting clues are found out about this bottle and the paper that it's written on. This is a federal investigation. So they have investigators looking at this, and they find out that it's a type of bottle that's been manufactured in Brazil. And the paper, which the note was written on, was commonly made in Norway. So there we have a Scandinavian connection. Okay, so that's starting to cement as maybe this thing being real.
Yes.
Here's another cementing factor to this thing being genuine is that they look at the handwriting on the note, and the people that knew the crew members of the Deering, of course, they've got family and friends, they have them examine it, and people say it matches the handwriting exactly or very closely to the engineer that was aboard the Deering.
Right. The only one that Wormel and the other captains trusted.
Exactly.
Yes.
And he had an unusual way of spelling or writing, and where he would capitalize words, each word in the sentence rather than just the first word of the sentence. So it was an unusual little spelling tick, I guess you could say, and written, you could say, with an unusual handwriting tick, and matching people. There's a confirmation that, the engineer, he wrote just like this. We know him.
Yes.
And this note then appears to be very genuine because there you go. They just came from Brazil, which would explain the bottle. There were Norwegians or Scandinavians on board. That explains the origin of the paper. And then the writing is confirmed. And what did the note say?
The note said the following. Deering captured by oil-burning boat, something like chaser, taking off everything, handcuffing crew, hiding all over ship, no chance to make escape. Finder, please notify headquarters of Deering.
Well, that, of course, once that hits the press, then you start having lots of talk about piracy because, well, here you go. Here's some proof. I mean, it seems pretty solid. And there was the Washington Post at the time that added in some reporting that a torpedo boat chaser, that's a boat that's an interceptor that's going after the prey here out on the open ocean, or maybe even a submarine that had been acquired just after World War I, like a German U-boat that had been absconded with, and now they're using that for piracy. Well, that's a fun and interesting angle. I think the New York Times reported that doesn't seem very likely, but we can't rule that out. But now this is getting in the press and it's making headlines here. And now the theories start coming forth.
So here's the interesting thing. There were all kind of experts that identified not only the random capitalization of some of the words on the message that Bates used to do, but also the shapes of some of the letters when compared with other papers that were supposedly written by Bates. But later, there got to be some detectives involved in this. There was a lot of investigation that went into this case, and people were very, very suspicious about this message in a bottle. So it continued to get investigated, and eventually this detective figured out that something wasn't right about it, and he would go to meet with Christopher Columbus Gray, and Christopher Columbus Gray would answer like one question and then run off into the woods, leaving the guy stuck with his son. And the son was like a little boy. He was like,
dear.
well, I don't know where dad went. Kind of like,
Right.
so it started getting weirder and weirder. And then eventually what they figured out was something wasn't right. And this is really spelled out in the book, and it's too long to get into in the show. But essentially, Christopher Columbus Gray had a habit in the old days of leaving notes all over town for the girls that he liked.
Okay.
He would drop them on the ground. This seemed to be an affectation of his. So the more they investigated it, the more it turned out that he was the person who provided not only the message in the bottle, but the other samples. He had forged all of them. So the handwriting matched because everything was his. The whole thing was a ruse. And he had come up with it really to try and get work or to get ingratiated with the Coast Guard so he could get work.
Yeah, at the Hatteras Lighthouse, I think. That's where
At the Hatteras Lighthouse. And on top of that, he confessed to this.
After being plied with a lot of drinks, I think. I think that the one detective got very close to him and finally got him liquored up, and he admitted to it being a hoax. But then he also ran away. And then from what I read, that so he took off, and then not the most brilliant criminal move, but I think they advertised, or they sent him a notice somehow that he had been accepted for a job at his dream place, the Hatteras Lighthouse. Like, come on down and fill out an application. And he did, and that's when they nabbed him again. And then he's like, oh,
it's just like that thing where they're like, come turn in your guns, and they pick up everybody.
Right.
Yeah,
they nabbed Mr. Columbus Gray, and he confesses, but it's just an odd thing. And it reminds me again with the SS Kamloops, there was contention about another message in a bottle by one of the survivors there. Was her name Alice? And that was, I think there was some contention about if it being true. Again, they're not trying to get away with anything, but they're wondering, was she the last survivor of the Kamloops and sadly froze to death?
Oh, right.
On the
island.
So again, it's a tantalizing clue, but ultimately it turns out to be false, even though very odd. But you're saying, though, that he was leaving other notes with his handwriting on them and purporting to be coming from the engineer.
Yeah, there's a lot more detail on that. Again, we recommend picking up Ghost Ship of Diamond Shoals if you want to read more about it. It's pretty interesting. And the way that Simpson wrote the book, I was buying the message in a bottle. I was like, oh, wow, this is crazy. Because they had all these confirmations, just like any case where they're like, nope, this matches, this matches, this matches. Like when you watch Dateline or 2020. Yeah. And then in the last 15 minutes, they're like, all of that was bunk.
And then explain to us who Peter Sorensen is.
Well, the interesting thing about Peter Sorensen is he's one of those crew members. Yeah. He's one of the Scandinavian crew members, and his name turned up on some ships after the 11 crew members went missing.
Well, it's a fairly common Scandinavian name.
Yeah, so they didn't know, but the age matched and the ports matched, and there was supposed to be more looking into that to see if he might be the guy.
Right.
But according to Simpson's book, that just is it didn't go. It didn't get pursued much further. Not sure there. But yeah, it is a very common name. So that seems kind of thin. But that could be him. What if that's him? But why would you keep your name? If you disappeared at sea, would you then continue to sail under the same name?
Well, it's a good point, unless you had all your ID, or it's just so common and you look like every other Peter Sorensen out there.
Yeah.
It was a different time as well. Kind of the tail end, as we said, I think way back when we were covering the Count of St. Germain. Past the Isadora, who wrote the book about him. We're talking about being able to change your identity or just going to another country. Now, we're talking, of course, about early to mid to late 19th century, where not many records are kept. So you can show up at a meeting of the Masons in Vienna with the same name or something, like 60 years later. You're like, I knew this guy. But that was like 50 years ago. And so it's a little looser and easier to just assume a new identity back in that century. And now we're seeing kind of that phasing out. It's still easier, though, I think, in the 1920s, where you had records, some photos, but not a lot, and people just kind of went by, what you wrote down and didn't have to provide a lot of proof. And we saw that with that ease of immigrating to America with Ellis Island. I remember I have some relatives, beloved relatives by marriage, but they were Nielsen. So they were Danish. The story is, though, that they got to Ellis Island and the guy goes, what's your name? Nielsen? And they like, it's Nelson. I can't spell Neil. What is it? An E and I? Never mind. You're Nelson. And so Danes more so had the Nelsen spelling. Swedes, I think, had the Nelson spelling. I apologize if I got that wrong, but that's the way I was told. And it was just like, well, we're just changing your name a little to make it easier for our bookkeeping. So you could have come from Europe with a completely different spelled name, a different identity, and you got it reset as soon as you hit American soil back in the 20s. In this case, though, I mean, this is all just some odd clues to this thing, which I think is why it's been in people's imaginations ever since. And you had people popping up again, maybe like Flight 19, where there's a telegram from one of the guys in the squadron to the family. That's one of the more intriguing, weird things
he used his nickname. Only his family knew.
Exactly. And they're like, well, who would know that?
By the way, folks, if you haven't heard that, we did a series on Flight 19. Just look for Flight 19 and Astonishing.
It's all connected. There's also chicken shoals. If you remember, there's shoals in that one. Anything around the coast, shoals are
There's
involved.
a lot of shoals.
Well, they are the grease traps, the sink basin traps of the mysterious and paranormal. Things get stuck to them. I'm being not totally facetious here, that with maritime mysteries, shallow bits and things where mysteries get caught up, that's where you see them last before they get tossed out to sea forever. But here we're left with some interesting clues. Again, because this is thoroughly investigated by several entities of the time of the highest order, and records were made, again, because there's a lot of money riding on this thing. And it's not the 1820s, it's the 1920s. So it's a little more sophisticated, but not completely. So what do we have here? Well,
there's a lot of theories for this. Because
a good
we're
6 or
missing
7.
so much information. It's weird. We have a lot of information. We know that people, like, as I keep saying, we know people were on it the day before it was last seen heading towards the shoal.
Right.
So we know that it's not like a lot of ghost ships where, okay, it was lost in the ice and it keeps turning up for 60 years or whatever. It's sailing alone by itself, abandoned, or it's, well, they were supposed to be here 3 weeks ago. No, it was supposed to be here a few days ago. And a few days after that, it turned up stuck on this shoal. And the day before that, there were people on it. So what do we know? We know that the crew didn't get along. So anything could have happened there. Or might have been nothing happened. McClellan might have just had a big mouth and was surly, and they, never would have taken that next step. Maybe he just liked to talk a lot of smack, especially if he was drinking. Doesn't mean that he's a murderer,
Once you do that, you can't get work in this field again.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
if you love the sea, now you're on the land totally, or you have to assume a completely different identity, which is hard to do because, again, this is a tight-knit community in ways that these crews, like I said, people knew other people that were on the crew. They knew crews on other ships. Captains knew of these other people.
Yeah, it's a small community, really, when you think about it.
Right. If you're good and you want to get hired again, well, then you got a reputation to uphold. So if you're going to pull that trigger, you're kind of on the outs and done forever.
Yeah. So what you're saying is if you kill your captain, you're unlikely to get another gig.
It doesn't look good on the CV. Well, maybe you can go overseas. Well, here's the thing. Okay, yeah, maybe you can go overseas. You can go to Europe. But again, these are international waters. People know each other in different ports all around the world.
Yeah.
They're going to have heard about this. And certainly they did hear about this case. And so I don't know about that unless it was an accident. And they thought it might look bad if they pulled, rolled into shore here with the captain missing, especially after all the bad words were exchanged.
Well, all right. So let's get down to that. Let's talk about the different possibilities then. Of course, the first thing you think of is mutiny. But let's say it wasn't a mutiny. Let's say the crew all got off the ship together. They abandoned the ship for some reason that we haven't quite figured out. I mean, there's just so many things that could have happened here, and that's what's so crazy.
Combinations of things, as I always like to think.
Yeah, because one combination, for example, is McClellan got mad and smashed the binnacle with a sledgehammer, but didn't kill anybody, and also broke the wheel or damaged the rudder, and they couldn't control it anymore. The sails were up, but they couldn't control where it was going, so they abandoned ship. Of course, it doesn't really make sense. It doesn't seem to me, if the wind was blowing, that you would abandon ship with the sails up. You would want it to be going slow or stopped while you were lowering the yawl and the dory into the water. So maybe scratch that. But the other thing is the captain. There's a lot of ways the captain could have died. He was 66. He could have had a heart attack. He could have died of natural causes. He could have died during the storm they went through because they went through a pretty bad storm. But we also know they came out on the other side of it. But we didn't see the captain after the storm. So the captain could have died in the storm, either from natural causes or because McClellan pushed him overboard. Could be anything. And then after that, now they've got this ship. It's empty. They're supposed to go to Hampton Roads. The captain is dead. What are they going to do? If they show up in Hampton Roads without the captain, they're going to get prosecuted.
That's explaining to do, yeah.
Right. So then maybe they decide to set the ship to scuttle, and they get off the ship on the yawl and the dory, and they try to make a run for it. Then what happens to them then? This is a whole separate story. Now they're in the water in the yawl. The weather was not bad when the ship crashed, but the next several days it was bad. So the waves and the wind were just nuts. So it's like they could have had serious problems even if they managed to safely get off the ship. So let's say they killed the captain, then got off the ship in the yawl, they could still be lost at sea. And they might have never made it ashore. Now, there's at least one person in Simpson's book who says, because folks are like, well, how come no parts of the yawl washed up on shore? There were no bodies that washed up on shore. And there was, I can't remember what page it was on in the book now, but there was a statement to the effect, it's like, I've lived here my whole life. No body or wreckage from the outer shoal ever comes ashore because of the currents. It just doesn't. The currents just haul it away. So it's like, there's no mystery there. None. So they could have gotten off at that point, because then the next question is, well, when it hit the shoal, did they disembark then? But it doesn't seem like it based on what the Elon saw. If the Elon was looking at the Deering, which it seems like it probably was. So the next question is it piracy? Well, that was a kind of, Simpson's book suggests that was sort of a far-fetched thing at this point, and it's something that you alluded to earlier that was sort of dying down, not really a thing.
You're also doing it, again, as you stated before, or I guess we both did, is that you have Coast Guard stations spotted throughout at equidistant measure.
Yes.
And so it'd be like robbing the store next to the police station.
Yeah, just as they're standing out there 24/7 with telescopes watching the ocean.
Yeah, and what you said earlier, it had offloaded its cargo in Rio de Janeiro, and it was empty. It's not like it's a treasure ship. There's not much on board that's really worth anything.
Well, this brings me to one of the other theories that was alluded to lightly in Simpson's book, and I thought, well, this makes sense. It's very interesting. Barbados, home of rum, some of the best rum in the world. And so it's prohibition. There is a lot of rum running going on. There are ships that they're using like old blockade runners from the war to get booze ashore or up to New York or to the big cities where there's a good market for it. The Deering was big enough and had big enough holds that you could have very easily, under the cover of darkness, if you could have managed it, loaded a lot of rum into one of the holds, and the captain wouldn't have even known.
The estimate in those days prices would be at least $1 million worth of bootleg rum. And so definitely worth the money to take the, again, though, it's a slow ship comparatively to a steamer. Yeah. It's a big, hey, look at us kind of a thing, unless that's your cover.
But maybe it's not full. Maybe there's just a couple of barrels, and they're just like, maybe they're not thinking big picture. Maybe they get a little bit, and they're like, oh, well, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna kill the captain. We're gonna take these 10 barrels of rum, and we're gonna get off the ship and go sell those and use that money to hide out or whatever.
You're having to get off the ship. And as you said, no bodies washed up. Well, what about live people coming into port? Certainly the word was out by then. They would have been noticed in town. How do you get by any civilization along the whole coastline there without hiking, 50 miles inland?
Yes, very, very true, Forrest. And this points to one of the other super valid points for this theory section here. 11 people were never seen or heard from again.
Right.
Of course, let's say, okay, all 11 people lived, or, let's say 2 of them were killed and 9 lived, even though they're criminals, and they killed the captain and the engineer because he was trustworthy, or put them to sea. A lot of times, in the olden days, rather than actually kill you, they just put you out on a boat and like, good luck, and you're probably going to die. So they could have done that too. That might be why both boats were gone, and maybe why the coastal chart was gone. Maybe they took the captain and they're like, you know what, we're not going to kill you, but we're going to put you in the dory, the smallest tender. We're going to put you in there. You and Herbert Bates can go in there, and you guys can try to get to shore. Good luck. And they never made it, and their bodies weren't found, and neither was the dory. Entirely possible. And then they were like, we're going to get off in the yawl, and we're going to take 5 barrels of rum with us and go sail somewhere else and sell the rum. But if they did get away with it, let's say 9 people got away with that, then all 9 of those people's families and everyone they ever knew that knew who they really were would have had to kept quiet. And it just doesn't seem possible.
Yeah,
it just doesn't seem
definitely
possible.
think that they are missing. They're gone.
Somewhere there would be a rumor. It's like, well, my great uncle blah, blah, blah was actually on the Deering, and he made it ashore. There's no stories like that we know of. You know, it's not impossible, but it just seems like a little bit of a stretch for all those people to hide for that long. The other thing that I thought is one of the most interesting theories, and this is in Simpson's book as well, and a lot of the investigators apparently thought this too, was that whoever got off the ship, whether it was the entire crew under an amicable situation or the bad guys kill the captain or put the captain off in the dory, whatever they do, effectively murdering him, whether they do it directly or indirectly by the sea, they get off onto the Hewitt.
Yeah.
And they're on the Hewitt with plans to go somewhere, and maybe they're lying about what happened. Maybe they're like, oh, well, the captain had a heart attack and the ship, we can't sail it anymore. Can you give us a ride? And they get on the Hewitt. They have some other nefarious plan, or they have a perfectly good excuse for all getting off the boat and getting onto the Hewitt, but none of it matters because the Hewitt blew up.
Right.
And that's like, so it's like a complication on a complication on it. You just can never get to the bottom of this because that ship blew up, and we're not even sure that's what blew up. We just know something blew up, and they couldn't find any wreckage. And then also the Hewitt never turned up. And then we have the other steamer, which was not the Hewitt because it was going a different direction, a different day, that covered their transom and hid the name and sailed away from the lightship. It's like, what are those guys doing? What's going on? I mean, the whole thing's a mess.
There's
it's
definitely,
a mess.
I mean, that's the thing. It's just an odd mystery. It's one of those things where you have just enough clues to make the mystery even greater. And that's the fact of seeing the crew top deck disorganized a little, places where they shouldn't be.
Right.
To a captain's eye, it seems out of place. And you get that weird message of, let the company know we lost our 2 anchors. Like, anything else? No? You don't have anything else to say?
Right.
That's it? And then kind of going on their way, you have several mysteries going on. The other unreported ship, not the Hewitt, the other steamer ship that kind of turns tail and gets away not wanting to be recognized. Is that something else that's different, some other kind of nefarious thing going on, or is it connected to this? That's certainly a mystery. Could be totally unconnected with just overlapping pieces of evidence here that are obtained by the authorities, other captains. You're talking about a yawl or a dory, and who's on it? Where do those boats end up? Like, if they did make it to shore, where's evidence of those? Those are too large to be carried by any crew inland to be hidden or anything. They would have washed up and they would have had to have been left there. So those could have been discovered. So then you have to think that they did leave the ship. They were cut down. The lines were cut to drop them in kind of quickly, it would seem. Somebody got on those and something happened to them in those boats. And now we're back to the Mary Celeste, where there's a dangling, trailing rope, a line coming from the Mary Celeste, trailing out the back and leading to the theory that something on board was dangerous, perhaps that denatured alcohol. And whoever was left on board trailed out with a smaller lifeboat, and somehow the rope got untangled or untied, and now they're drifting afloat on the seas to starve to death. So again, you have drifting lines here. You have no evidence of any lifeboats, but you do have a sighting the day before they go missing.
Lula Wormel, the captain's daughter, who you mentioned earlier as being the pioneer, and by the way, she really was, is a whole component of this story. Again, this is in Simpson's book about her going to Washington, D.C., rattling cages, just really making sure that this investigation was thorough, and that's great because if she hadn't have done that, we wouldn't even know what we know now, which is amazing because not as much effort will go into these things without somebody like that behind it. And one of the things that she did was she got the ocean chart that was still on board when Captain Carlson went on from the rescue. And that ocean chart had an interesting tale to tell. I want to read this one paragraph from page 169 of Simpson's book. Mrs. Wormel and Captain Peterson pored over and over the Carroll A. Deering's ocean chart, following Captain Wormel's penciled markings of his noon position each day, to the point that his hand stopped making the northward record of the doomed ship's last sail, January 23rd, a week before she foundered. So if you look at January 23rd, that's the day that the Deering passed by the Frying Pan light vessel and was photographed, but no communication happened between the two. Later, on the 29th, 6 days later, she was seen off Cape Lookout. Now, there was a storm, which slowed everything down because those two places are not that far apart. But somewhere between the 23rd and the 29th, it would seem that the captain stopped marking the chart. So there's some question as to whether or not, and that was, he stopped marking it on the 23rd. So why did he stop marking it on the 23rd?
You're talking about, right, his handwritten notes in the margins of the maps.
Yes, and also the noon position every day.
However, the writing in these charts didn't stop there, did it?
No, it didn't. It continued, but it was clearly someone else's hand.
So someone else was taking over navigational duties.
Right.
There was a comment apparently by First Mate McClellan, that another complaint that Wormel's eyes were so bad, his eyesight was so bad that he had to do most of the navigational duties. And so that was another complaint that he was saddled by more tasks than he should have been. Although Wormel was a very seasoned, old, salty sea captain and knew his job very well, there were some shortcomings of his being 66 and retired, and that, it's like, well, I got to do a bunch of duties for him. Also, every time I try to discipline the crew, he steps in. He's micromanaging. Yeah. I don't like that.
I should be the captain.
You do wonder.
There's one of those in every
of course. Well, he's nearly closely the captain. Maybe he was captaining the ship towards the end there. But what's clear is that at some point, the captain wouldn't have allowed somebody else to make the notes in the charts, and notes had to be made.
Yeah.
And so somebody had to write something down. That's the other important thing. Like, well, if you committed a crime, that's evidence, you could see it, but it's important enough of a duty to have to continue. So somebody else was making notes in the charts to keep going for, would you say 11 days, I think?
No, it was a week.
A week, yeah, that's right, before no notes at all. So someone else was doing those duties, but we're not sure who was continuing on with the notations in the marginalia there. Yeah, it's just another odd clue that they continued on after, for some reason, Captain Wormel did not continue doing his duty.
Yeah.
All right. Are you ready now for conclusions?
Yes.
Do you want to hear mine first?
You know what I do. What's yours? I'm waiting.
You know who's at the fault of all this?
Who?
The cats. And you want to know why? Because it's just like the scenario in The Thing.
Yes.
They're the alien monsters. They killed everyone on board. Then they assume the form of sweet little innocent gray kitties mewling and starving. And we didn't eat the ribs, but we ate the rest of the passengers. So anyway, that's the
that's your theory. That's what you're going with. Huh?
Could be. It's just like it's like the Huskies. Remember at the and Scandinavians at the Antarctic station that gets discovered by Kurt Russell and his crew.
Yeah,
it's posing as a husky, and of course, you must be a maniac if you want to kill a husky, as I personally do, because we had huskies. But the idea, though, is that this thing, whatever it was, killed the crew and just assumes its form and continues to live on, and in a nice, comfy home, though, of which captain took him in?
Captain Carlson on the rescue.
That's right. Now, okay, all kidding aside, well, I don't know. There's a lot of odd things. I think, like probably most everyone else, some sort of mutinous, if not all-out mutiny, perhaps some sort of mutinous action that perhaps went too far, or something bad happened to Captain Wormel that they were afraid of, that's going to look bad. It's going to look like
even
mutiny.
if it was natural causes, they don't want to show up with a dead captain.
Yeah,
I can see that, too.
Like I said.
Especially after they've been fighting and arguing everywhere they go.
Right. Hey, well, look what happened to Captain Kidd. He's the captain, but he reprimanded one of his crew members so badly, he hit him in the head with a bucket, split his head open.
Yeah.
And he got dinged for that pretty badly.
Yeah.
So there is some justice to be meted out. And again, if the captain passes away very, I don't know, just under suspicious circumstances, they may have taken a few drastic actions that just led to a tragedy of some kind, like one thing happening after another, comedy of errors.
Yeah.
And they all end up going over the side. I think it's a combination of factors, but like I said, if not all out mutiny, then maybe something that was not too above board, for a more sailing term here, that looks bad on them. So they took some action that ultimately caused them to either get in lifeboats, because I think that's what we know too, is that they tried to get away from the ship. They collected up what they could, had time enough to do that. So they not under total duress and not being battered around in a horrible storm, because those are open boats. You're much more safe aboard the schooner.
Yeah.
But also the masts and the sails were all up, okay? So they're all unfurled. So that also doesn't denote like a huge hurricane. As was noted in all the reports, other ships were being battered about by the hurricane, because that's another theory, is that the hurricane had swept everybody aboard. But those two ships had steered away. The Deering and is it the Hewitt, I think, had both charted and had their courses going away from bad weather. So they were not expected to have been in it. Yeah. So you can rule out, I think, hurricane weather having swept people aboard. So that doesn't make sense. So something got them off the ship, and that's where they perished.
UFO.
And probably got swept out to sea. And here's the funny thing. People say like, oh, come on. People will say it's the Bermuda Triangle. But you're 90 miles away, or 60 miles away or so from the top corner of the triangle. It's like, these aren't totally defined borders on this triangle business.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So there could be some weirdness. Like I said, a combination of something that disoriented them. It's the same thing with Flight 19. It's like, that should have all been routine. They're not that far out. This shouldn't have happened. But for some reason, and then we have a lot of comments when we did that series back then of Captain Charles Taylor leading the squadron, the training flight, in that, why would he do that? It doesn't make any sense. He should know where the sun is.
Yeah.
He wouldn't need his compass.
Yeah.
Well, something happened to them that totally put the whammy on them. You know what I'm saying? Like, in their perception, in their minds, something screwed them all up, where even the other guys were like, hey, Captain, that's not the way to go.
Yeah.
Why start sailing your boat directly into the shoals where you know you're going to ground it? That's why the other guys are like, well, they must know what they're doing. They wouldn't intentionally do that.
Yeah.
So that's about all I got. It's just rather thin, but I do think, like I said, mutiny is the most common, maybe obvious kind of thing, but like, that doesn't totally make sense, because where do those guys end up? They may have tried to get away, but were swept away by the waves, never to be seen again.
Or killed on the Hewitt, maybe.
That's another thing too. That
like,
here's
maybe
the other
they
mystery.
Successfully mutinied and then also died.
There could have been the other
it's so
ships.
Complicated.
Like I said.
I think for me, there's a couple of things about it. I mean, one thing is weird. Yes, it came up under sail, just like it was going about its business. There's food in the galley. It seemed like people just got off of it while it was moving. Yeah. So that's strange. It would have been stranger to me had the yawl and the dory been aboard too, had the two tenders been on it. And like, that would have been a whole different level of strange for me, because it's like, okay, well, where did they go? What did they jump in the water? Those boats are gone. So it does seem like people got off. Somebody got off the boat. Someone definitely got off the boat, or unless somebody like lowered all the boats into the water and just pushed them away and then jumped off the boat.
There you go. Okay. I just thought of this. I didn't really occur to me. That all made me think of sabotage. Mm-hmm. But then where do the guys go? Okay. Think about this. Somebody gets on board. And what's clear is that, like you said, the binnacle is smashed. It's stove in.
Yeah, that's the weirdest thing.
Okay, like somebody did not, as I said earlier, it's obvious to me that that's not an accident. Somebody took a sledgehammer, most likely. They don't know whether they were trying to repair some part of the ship with the sledgehammer, or if it was used to destroy it, but I'll assume it was. And somebody did not want that ship being sailed after whatever act was done.
Right.
What if somebody cut the lifeboats down, the yawl and the dory, so that people couldn't use them? You know what I'm saying? So they could not be used to escape on.
Yeah, but then where did they go?
Well, that's what I'm saying, is that, so they were taken off the boat somehow by force or disappeared. But basically, what I'm saying is that the boats were, again, what I had read was that the boats were not lowered in usual fashion. They seemed to be cut from the lines.
That's true. Yeah.
So it was a hasty cutting down of the boat. People can see that, like you hit this, you flip the lever, and the boats drop down, I think with people in them.
Yeah.
So you don't have to climb 80 feet down from the side of the Titanic to get in the boat.
Yeah.
So you're lowered into the water with you in them in a gentle fashion, but somehow these lines were cut in a more hasty fashion to get them down quicker. What if they were just kind of cut loose? And now, I don't know why. It just seems like more sabotage to me.
Yeah.
And that now you can't get away, or you're taken off the boat. It's just another means of escape eliminated. Also, you're not going to be able to sail this thing successfully. So that's another bit of sabotage or scuttling of a ship, and not without completely destroying it.
Right.
Those things can be replaced, but when you're out to sea, that's pretty devastating because you're not going to get by without a wheelhouse functioning or a compass.
In conclusion here, the mutiny seems the most likely first step of whatever happened to me.
Right.
Just on the dreaded Occam's razor thing, just like all the fighting and McClellan and the nature of Merritt not wanting to go out with McClellan, and then Rommel going out, and all the drinking and everything. It seems like a mutiny was at the root of it. So I guess if I had to go with what I think most likely happened for me, it is that there was a mutiny. And in the course of the mutiny, they either killed the captain or set him adrift in the dory with whoever wanted to be on his side.
Mm-hmm.
And then the rest of them set the ship to run aground, and they got in the yawl and they departed too. And the only thing that happened, and the ones in the yawl, maybe they met up with the Hewitt, maybe they didn't. But whatever the case, everybody who got off the Deering into a smaller boat also died at sea and was not recovered. So in the end, whatever the plan was, really none of it worked out because nobody made it. And it's so complex. And there was so much darkness at play that we'll never really know what happened unless maybe you found the yawl and evidence of some kind on the yawl.
Well, some kind of an authentic note as to what happened, or somebody's last message, or they made it. And this is not impossible. Somebody did make it to shore, and they have a story that they kept with them until their deathbed. Well, this would have been too long ago, but we find some evidence in a diary, something pops up or somebody comes forward. I do think there are several things going on here to make the waters even muddier and kind of obfuscate, I think, the real reason here. But it was several things going on in a combination. Because again, it also makes it just seem so weird. Like, it's one of those, why would you do that kind of a thing? But obviously, again, what we know from the evidence is that somebody didn't want that ship to be piloted back successfully and quickly. So it didn't totally ruin the ship. Like I said, they if they had any explosives or they didn't do anything to really damage the ship, set it on fire or anything, they just wanted to stall or make it impossible to be sailed immediately after the action.
If they got off of it well before it hit the shoal, that bought them time.
Right.
It was a decoy of normalcy for whoever bailed out.
That's what I'm saying.
It's truly a very intriguing mystery. And in a lot of ways, I would say it's right up there with the Mary Celeste, if not in some ways more complex.
Mm-hmm.
There's less viable solutions to this one than there are to the Mary Celeste, in my opinion.
Yeah. A combination of things, possibly, again, some foul play, but foul play is not the main thing for me.
Well, this one is pretty hard to figure out, and I don't know if we're ever going to get the answer. It's just one more headstone in the graveyard of the Atlantic. That's going to wrap up episode 297 of Astonishing Legends. Look for new episodes of the Dead Letter Office weekly on Tuesdays, and we'll be back the week after next with 2 shows in a row.
If you're a regular Astonishing Legends listener, you already know about our weekly show, The Astonishing Dead Letter Office, which is part of our main feed. But that's just the start. Be sure to check out the other great shows in the Astonishing Legends Network, like The Midnight Library, Scared All the Time, and Richard Haddam's Paranormal Bookshelf. They are all very different from Astonishing Legends and each other, but at the same time, part of our network's shared collective vision. You can find links to them in all of our episode notes. Astonishing Legends is edited by Sarah Voorhees-Wendell at VW Sound. Our co-producer is Tess Feifel, who also leads our research efforts and manages our social media. And we're grateful for the hard work of our technical producer, Ed Vicola, behind the scenes. Special thanks to our announcer, John Boland, for lending his voice to our shows.
Hi.
Hi,
Hi, I'm Christar Marie.
I'm Steve Hayes,
I'm Corey Wells.
Galaxy-wide,
He-Man and Masters of the Universe,
Galaxy-wide in perpetuity.
present or future compensation.
Our theme, which is available as a ringtone, was composed by Judson Crane at foundermusic.com. All other music and sound design for the show is composed and created by Alan Carestia.
Our logo was created by Tommy Beaver Design, and our animated graphics for social media and YouTube are done by Joshua Sloan at deadstreetproductions.com.
Many episodes have transcripts available. For ones that don't, you can request them by emailing transcripts@astonishinglegends.com.
Astonishing Legends would not be possible without you, our listeners. Visit our store at astonishinglegends.com or interact with us and other listeners on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, Discord, and YouTube.
You can also visit us at patreon.com/astonishinglegends, where patrons have access to commercial-free versions of both the main show and the Dead Letter Office, as well as additional bonus content, including the Patreon-exclusive show, The Astonishing Junk Drawer. If you're new to Patreon, you can save money by signing up on the web through a browser or using an Android device rather than Apple's App Store, where Apple charges a 30% markup on signups through iOS. No part of this show may be reproduced anywhere without permission. Copyright Astonishing Legends Productions.
Good night.